Everett Hail wanted simple, plain, uncomplicated. But Lydia Vance arrived with secrets darker than the Montana dust, a past that won't stay buried, and danger trailing close behind. When her father's enforcer comes calling with a smile that promises violence, Everett faces a choice: send her back to the life she escaped, or stand between her and the men who believe she belongs to them. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach was 3 days late. Everett Hale stood outside the general store in Holt's Crossing, hat pulled low against the afternoon glare, watching the eastern road like it owed him money. Around him the town went about its business, horses tied to hitching posts, women with baskets, men arguing over fence wire. Nobody paid him much attention. That's how he preferred it. He'd placed the advertisement 6 weeks ago. Simple words, direct. Rancher seeks wife. No frills. Must be practical, plain, and willing to work. Romance not required. Companionship sufficient. He'd received 4 responses. 3 were clearly written by women who'd read too many dime novels, going on about destiny and the frontier spirit. He'd burned those. The 4th was different. I can cook, manage accounts, and mend what's broken. I don't need poetry, I need distance. If you can provide that, I can provide everything else. No name, just initials, LV. He'd written back with the date and the town. She'd confirmed. That was 8 weeks ago. Now the stagecoach finally appeared, a brown smudge against the pale horizon, raising dust like a signal fire. Everett straightened. Around him a few people paused to watch. The stage only came through twice a month, and it usually carried more than mail. The driver pulled the horses to a halt in front of the store, brake squealing. Dust settled. The door opened. A man climbed out first, traveling salesman by the look of him, cheap suit and a carpet bag. He nodded to no one in particular and headed toward the hotel. Then she stepped down. Everett had been expecting plain. He'd asked for it. What he got was something else entirely. She wasn't beautiful in the way people wrote songs about. Her face was angular, sharp at the cheekbones, mouth set in a line that didn't promise smiles. Dark hair pulled back tight enough to hurt. Dressed the color of old charcoal, dusty from travel, but well made. But it was her eyes that stopped him, pale gray, scanning the street with the methodical sweep of someone who'd learned to catalog exits. She carried one small trunk and a leather satchel she kept close to her side. Everett Hale? Her voice cut across the space between them before he could speak. Calm. No question in it, really, just confirmation. That's me. She walked toward him, steps measured, deliberate. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in the fine lines around her eyes, the way her jaw was set too tight. This was a woman who hadn't slept well in a long time. Lydia Vance. She didn't offer her hand. The ranch is far from here? Hour's ride. Good. She turned toward his wagon without another word, hoisting her trunk with a practiced motion that told him she was used to managing her own weight. He moved to help anyway. It was only proper, but she'd already settled it in the wagon bed before he could reach her. I can manage, she said, not looking at him. The ride out was quiet. Everett had never been much for conversation, but the silence felt different with her. Waited. She sat beside him on the bench, hands folded in her lap, eyes on the road ahead. Not nervous, not excited, just watchful. You came a long way, he said finally, more to fill the air than anything else. Yes. From where? A pause. East. He waited, but nothing followed. She wasn't going to elaborate. Fine. He'd asked for no complications. Apparently that included no history. The ranch came into view as the sun started its slow descent. 600 acres of decent grazing land. A house his father had built 40 years ago. Barn that needed new shingles, chicken coop, small stable. Nothing fancy. Nothing that would impress anyone who'd grown up with money. But Lydia looked at it the way someone might look at a fortress. How many hands do you keep? Just me right now. Had a man helping during spring roundup, but he moved on. Livestock? 60 head of cattle, dozen horses, chickens. She nodded, still taking it in. How much land can't be seen from the house? Strange question. Most of it? Why? Just wanting to know the lay of things. He pulled the wagon up to the house and climbed down. This time, when he reached for her trunk, she let him take it. Progress, maybe. Inside, the house smelled like dust and old coffee. He'd cleaned before leaving, swept, wiped down surfaces, opened windows, but it still had the emptiness of a place where one person lived alone for too long. The main room served as kitchen and sitting area both. Door to the left led to his bedroom. Door to the right had stayed closed for 3 years. Lydia set her satchel down carefully, like it contained something fragile or dangerous. Maybe both. "I'll take the spare room," she said, nodding toward the closed door. "That room's not—" He stopped. "I can make up a bed in there. Might take a day or two to get it properly sorted." "Tonight is fine. I don't need much." She was already moving toward it, hand on the doorknob. "Wait." The word came out harder than he meant. She stopped, turned. "That room hasn't been opened in a while. Let me go in first, make sure it's suitable." Her eyes held his for a long moment, reading him, maybe, measuring. All right. He hadn't been lying about the room. It was exactly as Rachel had left it. Clothes still in the wardrobe, hairbrush on the dresser, quilt she'd sewn folded at the foot of the bed. He'd closed the door the week after the funeral and never opened it again. Standing in the doorway now, with 3 years of dust coating everything, felt like stepping into a tomb. "This will take more than tonight," he said, voice rough. Lydia appeared beside him, looked into the room without expression. "Someone died here." "My wife. 3 years back." "I'm sorry." She said it the way people did when they meant it but had their own griefs to carry. Not performative, just fact. "The main bedroom has space," he said. "I can sleep in the barn until—" "No." She turned to face him. "I'll take this room, but I'll need your help clearing it first." "You don't have to—" "I do. I can't sleep in a shrine, Mr. Hale. Neither can you keep one forever. So we'll deal with it now, or I'll find somewhere else to stay." He should have been angry. Should have told her she'd been here all of 2 minutes and had no right to talk about his house, his dead wife, his grief. But there was something in her directness that cut through the impulse to defend. She wasn't being cruel, she was being practical. "All right," he said finally. "We'll clear it." They worked until the light failed. He packed Rachel's clothes into a trunk. He'd give them to the church, maybe, or burn them. He hadn't decided. Lydia stripped the bed, beat the dust from the mattress outside while he wiped down surfaces. She didn't ask questions about Rachel, didn't make gentle comments about loss or healing. She just worked, methodical and efficient, like this was a problem to solve rather than a wound to tend. By the time they finished, the room was empty of ghosts. Just 4 walls, a bed, a dresser, a window that looked west toward land that ran all the way to the mountains. Lydia stood in the doorway, surveying their work. "This is good," she said. "Thank you. I'll bring in your trunk." She'd already made up the bed with sheets from her own luggage by the time he returned. Practical gray linens, well worn, but clean. The trunk went at the foot of the bed. The leather satchel, he noticed, stayed within arm's reach on the floor beside her pillow. Dinner was beans and cornbread. He'd made it before they started on the room, keeping it warm on the stove. They ate at the small table in the kitchen, the silence between them less strained now. Working together had worn down some of the sharp edges. "I can cook," Lydia said, mopping up bean juice with a piece of cornbread. "I'll take over meals starting tomorrow." "You don't have to. We had an arrangement, Mr. Hale. I'm here to be useful, not decorative. Let me be useful. Everett. You can call me Everett." "All right. Everett." She tested the name, then nodded. "And you can call me Lydia." After dinner, she excused herself to her room. He heard the door close, the soft sound of her moving around, then nothing. He sat in the main room, staring at the dying fire in the hearth, wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. She wasn't plain, she was sharp, controlled, deliberate in every movement, every word, and she was running from something. He knew that much. The way she'd asked about sightlines from the house, the way she kept that satchel close, the way she'd scanned the street when she stepped off that stagecoach. He should ask, should know what he was bringing onto his land. But he'd promised distance, no complications. Maybe her secrets were the price of that. The next morning, he woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Lydia was already in the kitchen, dressed in a simpler work dress, hair still pulled back tight. She'd found his supplies, figured out his stove, and was cooking breakfast like she'd lived there for years. "Morning," she said without turning around. "Eggs?" "Please." She cracked 3 into the pan with practiced efficiency. "I looked over your account book." He froze in the middle of reaching for a cup. "You what?" "It was on the desk. Open." She flipped the eggs. "Your numbers are off. You're losing money somewhere." "I manage my own." "Poorly." She slid the eggs onto a plate, added bacon, set it in front of him. "You're buying feed at twice what you should be paying, and your cattle count doesn't match your expenses. Either you're miscounting or someone's stealing from you." He stared at the plate, then at her. "You went through my books." "Yes." "Without asking. I'm going to be living here. I need to know if this operation is solvent or if I should start making other plans." She sat down across from him with her own plate. "So, are you being cheated or are you just bad at math?" Heat rose in his chest. This was his land, his business. She'd been here one night and was already... "Probably both," he said, the anger deflating as quickly as it came. She almost smiled, almost. "Then we'll fix it. After breakfast, show me the feed supplier's invoices." They spent the morning going over paperwork. Lydia had a head for numbers that made his own attempts look childish. She found discrepancies in 3 months of purchases, pointed out charges that didn't match delivery amounts, calculated exactly how much he'd been overcharged. $400, she said, tapping the final number. "In 6 months. Christ. Who do you buy from?" "Carson's feed in town." "And who handles the money when you're not there?" He thought about it. "His son. Ben Carson." "The son is stealing from you, probably has been for a while." She closed the ledger. "We'll need to confront him." "We?" "I'm better with numbers. You're better with..." She gestured vaguely at him. "Presents. We'll go together." They rode into town that afternoon. Lydia sat beside him again, but this time she looked less like she was planning an escape and more like she was planning an attack. Carson's feed and supply sat on the north end of town, a large building that smelled like grain and horse. Ben Carson was behind the counter when they walked in, mid-30s, soft around the middle, the kind of smile that came too easy. "Everett, good to see you. What can I..." He noticed Lydia, and something shifted in his expression. Curiosity, maybe, or calculation. "Didn't know you had company." "This is my wife," Everett said, the word strange in his mouth. "Lydia." "Ma'am?" Ben nodded. "What brings you both in?" Lydia set the ledger on the counter between them. "You've been overcharging us. $400 in 6 months. I have the itemized list right here." Ben's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went flat. "Now, I don't know what you think you found, ma'am, but I found theft." She opened the ledger, pointed to the first discrepancy. March 3rd. 50 pounds of oats at 60 cents per pound. $30. But the receipt you gave Mr. Hale says 40 pounds. You pocketed $10. That's a mistake in the... March 17th, 100 pounds of barley. Same pattern. April 2nd, April 19th, May 6th. She flipped through pages, each one marked with her precise handwriting. Every 2 weeks like clockwork, small enough not to notice, large enough to add up. Ben's face had gone red. "You calling me a thief?" "I'm stating facts. What you call yourself is your business." "You can't prove..." "I can prove every single transaction, and I will if you'd like me to bring this to your father or the sheriff." Lydia's voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen. She didn't need to. "Or you can refund what you stole and we'll call this a lesson learned." The silence stretched. Everett stood beside her, one hand resting on the counter, saying nothing. He didn't need to. Lydia had this handled. Ben looked between them, jaw working. Finally, he pulled a cash box from under the counter. 400, Lydia said. "Now." He counted it out, hands shaking slightly with either fear or rage. Probably both. Lydia took the money, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her pocket. "We'll be taking our business elsewhere," she said, "but I expect you'll think twice before trying this with anyone else." They walked out into the afternoon sun. Everett waited until they were back in the wagon before he spoke. "You enjoyed that." "I did." "No shame in it, just fact. Where'd you learn to handle books like that?" For the first time since she'd arrived, something vulnerable crossed her face. Then it was gone. My father's house. He believed women should understand money even if they weren't allowed to control their own. Sounds like a hard man. Hard doesn't begin to cover it. She didn't elaborate. He didn't push. They stopped at the general store on the way out of town. Lydia needed supplies. Fabric for new curtains, flour, sugar, a few other household things. Everett waited with the wagon while she went inside. That's when he noticed the man. Tall, well-dressed for Holt's Crossing, suit that actually fit, boots with a polish. He was standing outside the hotel, watching the street with the same careful attention Lydia had shown. When his gaze landed on Everett's wagon, it lingered. Everett felt the back of his neck prickle. The man started walking toward him, casual, unhurried, but deliberate. "Afternoon," the stranger said, stopping a few feet from the wagon. "Fine day." "It is. You from around here?" "I am." "Good to know." The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking for someone. Woman, late 20s, dark hair, might have arrived on the stage a day or two ago. You happen to see anyone like that?" Everett's hand tightened on the reins. "Lots of women have dark hair. This one would have been traveling alone. Might have seemed skittish, like she was running from something." "Can't say I noticed." The man's smile widened. "That's a shame. I'd be willing to pay for information. $50 to anyone who can point me in the right direction." "What's your interest in her?" "Family matter. Nothing to concern strangers." Lydia emerged from the store at that moment, arms full of wrapped packages. She saw the man, and every line of her body went rigid. The stranger's expression shifted, satisfaction mixed with something colder. "Well now," he said softly. Everett climbed down from the wagon, putting himself between Lydia and the man. "You need help with those packages, Lydia?" She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the stranger like he was a rattlesnake coiled to strike. "Lydia Vance," the man said. "Been looking for you." "You need to leave." Everett's voice came out flat, hard. "This doesn't concern you, friend. This is between... She's my wife. That makes it my concern." The stranger's eyes flicked between them, reassessing. "Your wife? That's interesting. Does your wife's father know about this arrangement?" "Doesn't matter what he knows." "Oh, I think it matters quite a bit. See, Mr. Vance sent me to bring his daughter home. He's very concerned about her welfare." "I'm not going back." Lydia's voice was quiet but steady. "Tell him I'm not going back." "That's not really an option, Miss Vance." "It's Mrs. Hale now," Everett said, "and you can tell her father she's staying here." The stranger studied him for a long moment. "You know what you're getting into, Mr. Hale." "I know she's my wife. That's all I need to know." "Then you're a fool." The man tipped his hat. "I'll be in town a few more days, in case either of you change your minds." He walked away, back toward the hotel. Lydia stood frozen until he disappeared inside. Then she sagged against the wagon like all her strings had been cut. "That was Calder," she whispered. "My father's man." "I figured. He won't stop. He'll come to the ranch. Let him come." Everett took the packages from her arms, set them in the wagon bed. "We'll deal with it." "You don't understand, my father. I understand a man sent someone to drag you back against your will. That's all I need to understand." She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since they'd met, searching for something. Truth, maybe. Or commitment. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." He didn't have a good answer. Didn't know why he'd lied to Calder, why he'd claimed her as his wife when the paperwork wasn't even filed yet, why he was standing here promising to face down whatever her father might send. Maybe it was because she'd looked at Rachel's room and said they needed to clear it. Maybe it was because she'd sat across from Ben Carson and taken back what was stolen without flinching. Maybe it was because she'd asked for distance, and he understood that need down to his bones. "Because you're here," he said finally, "on my land, under my roof. That means something." They drove back to the ranch in silence, but this time the quiet felt different. Less like two strangers and more like two people standing on the same side of a line. That night Lydia told him everything. They sat at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold between them, while she laid out the whole story. Her father, Jonathan Vance, railroad magnate, political operator, man who'd built an empire on other people's broken backs. Her mother, who died when Lydia was 12. The arranged marriage to a senator's son, a man 30 years her senior who collected young wives like some men collected hunting trophies. I refused, she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. 3 times. But my father doesn't accept refusal. He locked me in the house, told me I'd come around, that I'd see reason. How'd you get out? Bribed a housemaid, sold my mother's jewelry to pay for passage west, changed my name at every stop. She met his eyes. I saw your advertisement in a newspaper someone left at a hotel. It seemed like safety, distance, exactly what I needed. And now Calder's here. My father won't stop sending men. He views me as property, as leverage for his political ambitions. She wrapped her hands around the cold coffee cup. I should leave. Go further west. Canada, maybe? No. Everett, you want to run? I won't stop you, but you don't have to. We can make this legal. File the marriage papers tomorrow. Once you're legally married, your father's got no claim. That won't stop him. He doesn't care about legality. He cares about control. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. But you're not running again unless you choose to, not because you're scared. She studied him across the table, this quiet rancher who'd asked for simple and gotten her instead, complicated, dangerous, dragging trouble behind her like tin cans on a rope. You'd do this? Actually marry me? Face down whatever my father sends? I would. Why? He thought about Rachel, about the 3 years he'd spent closing doors, shutting down, going through motions, about the way Lydia had walked into that sealed room and said they'd deal with it now. Because I'm tired of living like a ghost, he said, and I think maybe you are too. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but close. All right, she said. We'll file the papers tomorrow. They did. Judge Morrison married them in his office above the general store, his wife and the store clerk serving as witnesses. The whole thing took 10 minutes. Lydia signed her name, her real name, in the registry. Everett signed his. The judge pronounced them husband and wife with all the ceremony of a livestock sale. Walking back to the wagon, Lydia touched the wedding band Everett had bought that morning. Simple gold, nothing fancy. This is the strangest wedding I've ever been to, she said. You been to many? Fair point. They were halfway back to the ranch when they saw the dust. Riders, 3 of them, coming fast from the east. Everett pulled the wagon off the road into a small grove of cottonwoods. Lydia didn't ask why. She just climbed down with him, staying low behind the wagon bed. The riders passed without slowing, Calder and 2 others heading toward town, away from the ranch. He's looking for you in the wrong places, Everett said. For now. They waited until the dust settled before getting back on the road. At the ranch, Everett checked the rifle above the door, made sure it was loaded. Lydia watched from the kitchen table. You know how to shoot? He asked. Yes? Good. There's a pistol in the desk drawer. Keep it close. You really think he'll come here? I think a man doesn't hire 3 riders unless he plans to use them. That night, neither of them slept well. Everett kept his boots on, ears tuned to every sound outside. Lydia sat in her room, door cracked, that leather satchel open on her lap. Inside it, he'd glimpsed a small pistol, a stack of letters, and a photograph of a young woman who might have been her mother, everything she'd managed to take when she ran. Dawn came quiet. No riders, no trouble. Just the usual sounds of the ranch waking up, chickens, horses, cattle lowing in the distance. They worked through the morning, Everett mending fence while Lydia reorganized the storage shed. Around noon, she brought him water and stood watching him work. I've been thinking, she said. Yeah? If we're really going to make this work, the ranch, I mean, we need to be smarter about it. You're losing money because you're trying to do everything alone. Can't afford to hire help. Not permanent help, but seasonal work, shared labor with other ranchers. There are ways to make this more efficient. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. I made a list. He took it, scanned her neat handwriting. Equipment sharing agreements, cooperative feed purchasing, rotating grazing schedules, all things he'd thought about but never had the energy to organize. This is good, he said. I know. No false modesty, just confidence. Give me 2 months and I'll have this operation running at twice the efficiency for half the cost. 2 months might be all we've got before your father makes his move. Then we'd better work fast. They did. Over the next week, Lydia transformed the ranch's operations. She negotiated deals with neighboring ranchers, set up a proper bookkeeping system, reorganized the barn, and somehow convinced old Tom Fletcher, who hadn't spoken to Everett in 5 years over a property line dispute, to share equipment. Everett watched her work with something like awe. This woman who'd shown up running from danger had turned into a force of nature, but every night she still kept that pistol close. And every morning, Everett checked the horizon for riders. Calder hadn't left town. Everett knew because he'd seen the man twice more, once outside the hotel, once near the livery. Watching. Waiting. He's trying to figure out his next move, Lydia said when Everett mentioned it. My father probably told him to bring me back quietly, without causing a scene that might reach the newspapers. And if he can't do it quietly, then he'll do it loudly and deal with the consequences after. The answer came on a Thursday afternoon. Everett was in the barn when he heard Lydia call his name. Not scared, urgent. He came outside to find her standing in the yard, looking toward the road. A single rider approached. Not Calder. Someone else. The man was older, maybe 60, dressed in expensive clothes that had no business on a ranch. He rode well but carefully, like someone who'd learned in English riding schools rather than Western saddles. He stopped 20 feet from the house, looked at Lydia with an expression that mixed disappointment and something colder. "Daughter," he said. Lydia's face went blank. "Father." Jonathan Vance had come himself. Everett moved to stand beside Lydia, not in front of her, beside her. A subtle difference that Vance noticed. "Mr. Vance?" Everett said, keeping his voice neutral. "And you must be the rancher who thought he could steal my daughter." Vance's voice was cultured, educated, the kind of voice that was used to being obeyed. "Everett Hail, I presume." "She's not stolen. She's married. To a stranger, in a sham ceremony designed to avoid her legal obligations. There's nothing sham about it. We filed papers. Judge Morrison married us legal and proper." Vance's expression didn't change. "Lydia, we're going home. I've been patient. I've given you time to come to your senses. That time is over." "I'm not leaving," Lydia said. "I'm married. This is my home now." "This?" Vance gestured at the ranch with barely concealed contempt. "A failing operation on mediocre land with a man who can barely keep his own accounts. This is what you chose over the life I built for you?" "Yes." The word hung in the air between them. Simple. Final. Vance's jaw tightened. "You will come home. Either willingly, or I will have you declared mentally incompetent and removed by force." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that no sane woman would throw away her future for this. I have 3 doctors who will testify to your unstable mental state. I have lawyers who will have this marriage annulled before sunset." He leaned forward in his saddle. "You think you've found freedom? You've found a prison. And when I'm done, this man will have nothing. I'll destroy him, his land, his reputation, everything." Lydia's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. "Then do it, because I'm still not coming with you." For the first time, Vance looked genuinely angry. "You ungrateful! That's enough!" Everett's voice cut through. "You've said your piece. Now you can leave." Vance turned his attention to Everett, eyes cold. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A man who thinks he can buy or threaten his way to anything. Maybe that works in your world. But out here, it doesn't mean much. Everything means something when you have enough power. Then use it. Send your lawyers, send your doctors, send whoever you want. But Lydia stays here because she chooses to, not because you allow it." The 2 men stared at each other across the dusty yard. 2 different kinds of power, one built on wealth and influence, one built on land and stubbornness. Finally, Vance straightened in his saddle. "You'll regret this." "Maybe, but it'll be my regret to carry." Vance looked at Lydia one more time. "When this falls apart, and it will, don't come crawling back. I won't open the door." "Good," Lydia said, "because I won't knock." He turned his horse and rode away, back toward town, leaving nothing but dust and the weight of his threats. Lydia stood very still, watching until he disappeared. Then her legs gave out. Everett caught her before she hit the ground, guided her to sit on the porch steps. She was shaking now, the control she'd maintained fracturing. "He meant it," she whispered. "Every word. He'll destroy you." "Let him try." "You don't understand. My father doesn't make empty threats. He has lawyers, politicians, judges in his pocket. He'll come after your land, your livelihood, everything." "Then we'll fight it." "With what? We can't afford lawyers like his." "We'll figure it out." He sat beside her on the steps. "Lydia, look at me." She did, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm not afraid of your father. I'm not afraid of his lawyers or his threats. You want to know why? Because I spent 3 years being afraid of living, afraid to open a door, afraid to let anyone in, and I'm done with that." He took her hand, felt it trembling in his. "Whatever comes, we'll face it, together." A tear slipped down her cheek. Just one. She wiped it away impatiently. "I brought this on you." "No, you brought yourself. The rest is just circumstances." She laughed, small and broken. "Circumstances. That's one way to describe my father." They sat together as the sun moved across the sky, two people who'd started as strangers and become something else. Something neither of them had planned, but both of them needed. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Lydia knocked on Everett's bedroom door. He opened it to find her standing there in her nightgown, that leather satchel in her hands. "I can't sleep," she said. "Keep thinking I hear horses." "You want to sit in the main room? I can make coffee." "No, I just—" She looked down at the satchel. "This is everything I have left of before. Letters from my mother, a picture, some jewelry I didn't sell. I've been keeping it close because I was afraid someone would take it. No one's taking anything from you here." "I know. That's what I'm realizing." She held out the satchel. "Can you keep this somewhere safe? Somewhere I don't have to watch all the time?" It was trust, pure and simple, the kind that costs something to give. "I can do that." He took the satchel to his room, put it in the trunk at the foot of his bed, the same trunk that held Rachel's packed belongings. 2 women, 2 different kinds of loss, sharing space. When he came back out, Lydia was still standing in the hallway. "Thank you," she said, "for today, for standing with me. It's what people do when they're married." "Is it? My parents weren't like this. My mother died trying to be what my father demanded. And the man he wanted me to marry, he would have broken me the same way. That's not what this is." "I know." She managed a small smile. "This is strange and imperfect and held together with hope and stubbornness. But it's real. More real than anything I had before. Get some sleep," he said gently. "Tomorrow, we'll start figuring out how to protect the ranch." She nodded and turned back to her room. But at the door, she paused. "Everett, if this all falls apart, if my father wins, I want you to know I don't regret it. Any of it. It's not falling apart. But if it does, it won't." She studied him for a moment, then nodded and closed the door. Everett stood in the empty hallway, feeling the weight of what they'd taken on. A powerful man's wrath, legal threats, the possibility of losing everything. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt alive enough to care about losing something. That had to count for something. The lawyer arrived 6 days later. Everett was fixing a broken fence post when he saw the buggy coming up the road, polished black, pulled by a matched pair of grays that had no business on ranch land. The kind of transportation that announced money before the passenger even stepped out. He didn't bother going back to the house, just stood there with the post hole digger in his hands, waiting. The buggy stopped 20 feet away. The man who climbed out wore a suit that probably cost more than Everett's best horse. Thin, gray-haired, with the sort of face that had spent decades finding loopholes. "Mr. Hale?" "That's right." "My name is Victor Ashworth. I represent Jonathan Vance in several legal matters." He pulled a leather case from the buggy. "I have documents that require your attention. I'm kind of busy. This won't take long. May we speak inside?" Everett looked toward the house. Lydia had appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Even from this distance, he could see the tension in her shoulders. "We can talk right here," Everett said. Ashworth's smile was thin. "As you wish." He opened the case, pulled out a thick stack of papers. "Mr. Vance has filed a petition to have his daughter declared mentally incompetent. These are the supporting documents: medical evaluations, witness statements, expert testimony. A hearing has been scheduled in Denver for 2 weeks from today." She's not incompetent. The doctors disagree. They've documented a pattern of erratic behavior, poor judgment, emotional instability, running away from home, entering into a hasty marriage with a stranger, abandoning family and social obligations without rational explanation. Ashworth's tone was professionally neutral, like he was reading a grocery list. The evidence is quite compelling. The evidence is manufactured, perhaps, but it will be persuasive in court nonetheless. He produced another document. Additionally, Mr. Vance has filed suit challenging the validity of your marriage. Given that Miss Vance was under emotional duress and potentially not of sound mind when she consented, there are grounds for annulment. Everett felt heat rising in his chest. She knew exactly what she was doing. Can you prove that? In a court of law before a judge who's known Jonathan Vance for 20 years? Ashworth tucked the papers back into his case. Mr. Hale, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to present reality. You're a rancher, a good one, from what I understand. But you're in over your head. Jonathan Vance has resources you can't imagine. He will bury you in legal fees. He will tie up your land in litigation. He will make your life so difficult that keeping his daughter will cease to be worth the cost. Is that what he told you to say? It's what I'm telling you because it's true. You seem like a reasonable man, so I'm offering you a way out. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. $5,000. Sign the annulment papers. Testify that Lydia was emotionally unstable when you married and walk away. You'll have enough money to pay off your debts, improve your operation, maybe hire some help, and you'll avoid a legal battle you cannot win. Everett looked at the envelope. $5,000 was more money than he'd see in 5 years of ranching, maybe 10. It would solve problems he'd been carrying for longer than he wanted to admit. All he had to do was say Lydia was crazy, sign some papers, let her go back to a life she'd run from hard enough to cross half a continent. No. Ashworth's expression didn't change. Mr. Hale, no, she's my wife. She stays here. You can tell Vance to take his money and his lawsuits and go to hell. You're making a mistake. Probably, but it's mine to make. Ashworth studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. You'll receive a summons for the Denver hearing within the week. I'd recommend you retain legal counsel, though I doubt you can afford anyone who could effectively counter Mr. Vance's team. He climbed back into the buggy. I'll be seeing you in court, Mr. Hale. The buggy pulled away, leaving Everett standing in the yard with a post-hole digger and the sinking feeling that he'd just made things exponentially worse. Lydia met him halfway to the house. How much did he offer you? $5,000. She went pale. That's a fortune for a ranch this size. It is. Why didn't you take it? Because you're not for sale. She looked at him like he'd started speaking another language. Everett, that money could change everything for you. The ranch, your future. I don't want a future that comes from selling you out. This isn't romantic nobility. This is practical insanity. My father will destroy you in court. He has judges, expert witnesses, doctors who'll say whatever he pays them to say. You can't fight that with what? Stubbornness? If that's all I've got, then yeah. You're going to lose everything. Maybe, but I'll lose it standing up instead of lying down. She stared at him, frustration and something else warring in her expression. You're impossible. You married me anyway. That was before I knew you were suicidal. Despite everything, he almost smiled. Little late to back out now. She didn't smile back, just shook her head and walked toward the house, leaving him standing there wondering if stubbornness really was all he had. That night, they sat at the kitchen table with what little money the ranch had saved, $340. Everett counted it twice, hoping the number would somehow improve. It didn't. We need a lawyer, Lydia said. Even a bad one costs more than this. There's a man in town, Jacob Morrison, the judge's cousin. He handles some legal work. Maybe my father will have 6 lawyers, 6 expensive, experienced lawyers who do nothing but win cases for powerful men. One small-town attorney isn't going to be enough. You have a better idea? She was quiet for a moment, fingers drumming against the tabletop. There might be someone. A woman I knew before. Margaret Chen. She was studying law when I left. Probably finished by now. Is she good? She's brilliant, and she hates my father. Lydia's mouth twisted. He tried to block her from the bar exam, said women had no place in courtrooms. She passed anyway, top of her class, just to spite him. Where is she? San Francisco, last I heard. But I don't know if she'd help. We weren't exactly friends, more like mutual survivors of the same social circles. It's worth asking, Lydia nodded slowly. I'll write to her. But even if she agrees, we'd have to pay travel expenses, lodging in Denver during the trial. It adds up fast. We'll figure it out. With what money? Everett looked at the pile of bills on the table. $340. It wasn't enough. Not even close. I could sell some cattle, he said. Not the breeding stock, but some of the younger steers. Maybe clear $800-900 if I get a decent price. That leaves you short for winter feed. I'll manage. By starving your herd? You have a better option? She didn't. Neither of them did. Lydia wrote the letter that night explaining the situation in careful, precise language. She posted it the next morning when they went into town for supplies. The answer, if it came at all, wouldn't arrive for weeks. In the meantime, they worked. Everett pushed through fence repairs, cattle counts, equipment maintenance, all the tasks he'd been putting off for months because he'd been too tired, too alone, too stuck in the past to care. Now he cared. Now he had reasons. Lydia threw herself into the ranch's books with the intensity of someone trying to outrun fear. She found 3 more instances of overcharging from other suppliers, renegotiated deals, set up a payment schedule that would let them stretch their money further. She was good at this, better than good. She had a mind that saw patterns, found solutions, refused to accept defeat, even when defeat seemed inevitable. They fell into a rhythm, working separately during the day, coming together at meals, sitting in the evening going over plans and problems. It wasn't the marriage either of them had imagined, but it was real in ways that mattered. 2 weeks after Ashworth's visit, Calder showed up again. Everett was in the barn, mucking out stalls, when he heard Lydia's voice rise sharply from the house. He dropped the pitchfork and ran. Calder stood on the porch, 1 foot on the steps like he owned the place. Lydia blocked the doorway, fury written across her face. I said get off our property. Just delivering a message, Mrs. Hale. Calder's smile was all edges. Your father wants you to know the hearing's been moved up. 1 week from tomorrow. Seems the judge had a scheduling conflict. How convenient, isn't it? Also, he wanted me to mention that he's been talking to some of your neighbors, Tom Fletcher, the Hendersons, that widow who runs the boarding house in town, asking about your behavior, whether you've seemed stable, rational. Calder's eyes flicked to Everett as he approached. Whether your husband has been treating you well, or if maybe he rushed you into something you weren't ready for. We both know what this is, Lydia said. Intimidation, building a false narrative. Is it false? You did run away from home. You did marry a stranger. You are living on a failing ranch with a man you barely know. Calder shrugged. Those are just facts. How people interpret them? Well, that's up to a judge. Everett reached the porch, putting himself between Calder and Lydia. You delivered your message. Now leave. Sure thing. Calder tipped his hat. See you in Denver, Mrs. Hale. Or should I say Miss Vance? Since that's probably what the judge will be calling you after the annulment goes through. He walked to his horse, took his time mounting, then rode off at a leisurely pace, making it clear he wasn't afraid, wasn't worried, had all the time and power in the world. Lydia's hands were shaking when Everett turned to look at her. They moved the hearing up to catch us off guard, she said. We won't have time to prepare. Margaret won't even get my letter for another week at least. Then we go without her. With what lawyer? Jacob Morrison does property disputes and wills. He's never handled anything like this. Then we'll represent ourselves. She laughed, sharp and brittle. Against my father's legal team? We'd be slaughtered. Maybe, but showing up and fighting is better than giving up. Is it? Or is it just slower suicide? He didn't have an answer for that, didn't know if there was a right answer. All he knew was that backing down now felt like dying by degrees. They went into town the next day to talk to Jacob Morrison anyway. The lawyer's office sat above the general store, a small room crammed with law books and stacked papers. Morrison himself was 60-something, balding, with ink stains on his fingers and a permanent squint from reading by lamplight. He listened to their situation with increasing alarm. You want me to go up against Jonathan Vance's attorneys in a competency hearing? Morrison set down his pen carefully. Mr. Hale, I appreciate your confidence, but I'm not qualified for this. I handle contracts, property transfers, simple legal matters. What you're describing, this is beyond my experience. But you could try, Everett said. I could try and fail spectacularly, which wouldn't help Mrs. Hale and would damage my reputation in the process. Morrison looked genuinely apologetic. I'm sorry, but you need someone with trial experience, someone who knows how to counter the kind of tactics Vance's team will use. We don't have anyone else. Then you need to find someone, fast. Morrison pulled out a piece of paper, wrote a name. There's a lawyer in Cheyenne, Martin Cross. He's handled some difficult cases, might be willing to take this on. What's his fee? Morrison hesitated. High, but he's good, better than good. If anyone could stand up to Vance's attorneys, it's him. They left with the name and a sinking feeling. Cheyenne was 3 days' travel, and they had less than a week before the hearing. I'll go, Lydia said as they climbed into the wagon. Tonight. Catch the evening stage, be there by tomorrow night. Not alone. We can't both leave the ranch. I'm not letting you travel alone. Not with Calder and your father's men around. Then we'll both go. Hire someone to watch the place. With what money? We need every dollar for the lawyer. They argued about it all the way back to the ranch. Lydia wanted to go alone. Fast. Efficient. Everett refused to let her put herself at risk. Neither of them budged. The solution came from an unexpected source. Tom Fletcher showed up at sunset, riding his old mule, hat in his hands. Heard you might need help, he said when Everett met him in the yard. Who told you that? The widow Henderson. She mentioned Calder was asking questions about your wife, about whether she seemed right in the head. Tom's weathered face creased into something like shame. I told him she seemed fine to me. Smarter than most women I've met, actually. Smarter than most men, too. Appreciate that. I also heard you're headed to Cheyenne to find a lawyer. That true? Might be. Then you need someone to watch your place. I can do that. Stay here, feed the animals, make sure nobody comes sniffing around while you're gone. Tom met his eyes. I know we've had our differences, but what Vance is doing, trying to drag his daughter back like she's property, that ain't right. I got daughters of my own. Wouldn't stand for someone treating them that way. Everett felt something loosen in his chest. You'd do that? Already told my boys I'd be gone a few days. They can handle my place. Tom glanced at Lydia, who'd come out onto the porch. You go find that lawyer. Fight this thing proper. I'll make sure everything here stays standing. They left at dawn, catching the early stage to Cheyenne. The journey was long, cramped, dusty. Lydia sat rigid beside Everett, hands folded in her lap, staring out the window at passing landscape. She hadn't slept the night before. Neither had he. What if this Cross won't take the case? She asked as the stage jolted over a rough patch of road. Then we find someone else. And if there is no one else? There will be. She looked at him, something raw in her expression. You keep saying that, like certainty makes it true. Better than assuming defeat. I've spent my whole life watching my father win. Every time. Against better opponents than us. Against people with more money, more power, more everything. He always wins. Maybe it's time he didn't. Hope isn't a strategy, Everett. No, but it's a start. They reached Cheyenne late the next evening, exhausted and covered in road dust. Martin Cross's office was closed, but the building's caretaker told them where he lived. The house was modest but well kept, 2 stories on a quiet street. Lights burned in the windows. Someone was home. Everett knocked. The woman who answered was maybe 40, dark hair streaked with silver, wearing a simple dress and an expression of polite confusion. Can I help you? We're looking for Martin Cross. We were told he lives here. He does. I'm his wife, Ellen. And you are? Everett and Lydia Hale. We've come from Holt's Crossing. We need a lawyer. Ellen's expression shifted to something like sympathy. It's late, and Martin's had a long day, but come in. I'll see if he's willing to talk. They waited in a small parlor while Ellen went upstairs. Low voices filtered down, too quiet to make out words. Then footsteps. Martin Cross was shorter than Everett expected, stocky, with graying hair and eyes that looked tired. He wore shirt sleeves and suspenders, no jacket. A man interrupted at home. Mrs. Cross says you need a lawyer. I'm not taking new clients right now. We know, Everett said, but we're out of options. Everyone who comes to me thinks they're out of options. Most of them are wrong. Lydia stepped forward. My name is Lydia Vance. My father is Jonathan Vance. He's trying to have me declared incompetent so he can drag me back and force me into a marriage I don't want. He's hired 6 lawyers, bought testimony from doctors, and scheduled a hearing in Denver for 5 days from now. We have $300 and 1 week to prepare. Are we out of options? Cross's expression changed. Jonathan Vance, the railroad man. Yes. I know him, or of him. Cross gestured to the chairs. Sit. Tell me everything. They did. The whole story, from the mail order advertisement to Calder's visits to Ashworth's bribe offer. Cross listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a small pad he'd pulled from his pocket. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment. This is a disaster of a case, he said finally. Lydia's face fell. So you won't take it? I didn't say that. I said it's a disaster. Vance has money, connections, and time to prepare. You have none of those things. The hearing's been moved up to prevent you from mounting a proper defense. The judge is almost certainly in Vance's pocket. And even if by some miracle we win, Vance will appeal, drag this out for years if necessary. So what do we do? Cross leaned back in his chair, studying them both. We don't play his game, we play ours. Meaning what? Meaning we don't argue competency, we argue authority. Vance's entire case rests on the assumption that he has the right to control his adult daughter's choices. We challenge that assumption. Make it about his behavior, not yours. Lydia shook her head. His lawyers will just say I was manipulated, coerced by Everett. Were you? No. Then we prove it. We show that your marriage was a deliberate choice made by a rational adult woman. We bring witnesses who can testify to your competency. We demonstrate that running from your father was the rational response to an irrational situation. Cross tapped his pen against the notepad. We make Vance the one on trial, not you. Can that work? Everett asked. Maybe, if we're smart, if we're lucky, if the judge is even slightly inclined to fairness. Cross met their eyes. But I won't lie to you. The odds are bad. Vance has spent decades building relationships with people in power. He knows how to win, and he doesn't lose gracefully. What's your fee? Lydia asked quietly. For a case like this? Against an opponent like Vance? Normally I'd charge $2,000, plus expenses. The number hit like a punch. They didn't have $2,000. They had $300 and whatever they could scrape together by selling cattle they couldn't afford to lose. We can't pay that, Everett said. But we can pay something, and we can work off the rest. I'm good with my hands. Carpentry, fence work, whatever you need. Cross looked at him for a long moment, then at Lydia. Then at his wife, who'd been standing quietly in the doorway. Ellen nodded slightly. 500, Cross said. Half up front, half when this is over. Win or lose. We don't have 500, Lydia said. You have 3, you said. Give me that. We'll call the rest a loan. You can pay it back when you're able. Why would you do that? Cross's expression hardened. Because 20 years ago, Jonathan Vance destroyed a friend of mine. Ruined his business, his reputation, drove him to drink himself to death. All because my friend refused to sell his land for Vance's railroad. I've been waiting for a chance to put a blade in that man's ribs. This might be it. Everett and Lydia looked at each other. $300. It was most of what they had. If Cross lost, they'd be broke and Lydia would be gone. But if they didn't try, she'd be gone anyway. Deal, Everett said. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Cross was methodical, relentless. He interviewed them separately, together, asked questions that felt invasive and necessary. He wanted to know everything about Lydia's life before she ran, about her father's treatment, the forced engagement, the escape. He wanted dates, names, specific incidents that demonstrated a pattern of control. He grilled Everett, too, about the advertisement, the marriage, their arrangement, looking for cracks, inconsistencies, anything Vance's lawyers might exploit. They're going to paint you as a predator, Cross told Everett during one session. A man who took advantage of a vulnerable woman. You need to be ready for that. I didn't take advantage. I know. But they'll argue it anyway. So we need your story airtight. Why did you place that advertisement? Why did you choose Lydia specifically? What were your intentions? Everett thought about it. About the loneliness that had driven him to write those words. about Rachel's ghost haunting his house, about wanting someone who wouldn't ask him to be more than he was. I was tired of being alone, he said finally, but I didn't want romance. Didn't want someone expecting me to be something I wasn't ready to be. The ad was clear about that. Lydia's response matched what I needed. That's all. And now? Now it's different. How? Now she's my wife. Not because of some paper or arrangement, because she chose to stay, and I chose to fight for her. Cross nodded slowly. Good. That's good. That's what we'll tell the judge. They worked on Lydia's testimony next. Cross was gentle but firm, pushing her to articulate things she'd kept buried. Why did you run? He asked. Because my father gave me no choice. That's not enough. Why that specific decision? Why not wait, try to reason with him, find another way? Lydia's hands clenched in her lap. Because I'd tried reasoning. 3 times I refused the engagement. 3 times he ignored me. He locked me in my room, posted guards, told me I'd come around or he'd make me come around. Her voice shook. The man he wanted me to marry, Senator Hartford's son, he came to dinner once. He looked at me like I was a horse he was considering buying. Talked about my education, my accomplishments, my appearance. Never once asked what I wanted. When I objected, my father sent me to my room. Like I was a child. Like my opinion didn't matter. And you believed he'd force the marriage? I knew he would. My father doesn't make threats he won't follow through on. Cross scribbled notes. We'll use that. Show the pattern of control. Make it clear that running wasn't irrational. It was survival. On the 4th day, they traveled to Denver. The city was bigger than Holt's Crossing by orders of magnitude. Buildings stacked against each other, streets crowded with people and wagons and noise. Lydia watched it all with the expression of someone seeing a life she'd left behind. The hearing was scheduled for the next morning in the territorial courthouse. Cross had reserved them rooms at a modest hotel near the building. They checked in, went over the case one final time, then tried to sleep. Everett lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the city outside. In the next room, he could hear Lydia moving around, equally restless. Around 3 a.m, he heard her door open. Footsteps in the hall, a soft knock. He opened his door to find her standing there in her nightgown, face pale. "Can't sleep," she said. "Me neither. I keep thinking about tomorrow, about seeing my father again, about what happens if we lose." "We're not going to lose." "You don't know that." "No, but I believe it anyway." She looked at him, something desperate in her expression. "What if I'm not worth all this? The money, the fight, the risk to your ranch?" "You are." "How do you know?" "Because you fixed my accounts. Because you cleared Rachel's room without flinching. Because you stood up to your father and called her and every other person who tried to push you around." He reached out, took her hand. "Because you're the bravest person I've ever met, even when you're scared." She squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt. "I'm terrified." "I know, so am I. But you're still here. So are you." They stood in the doorway like that for a long moment, 2 people holding on to each other against the weight of what morning would bring. "Try to sleep," he said finally. "Tomorrow, we fight." She nodded and went back to her room. This time, when he lay down, exhaustion finally pulled him under. Morning came too fast and too slow at once. They dressed carefully, Lydia in her best dress, Everett in the one suit he owned, both of them looking like they were going to a funeral instead of a hearing. Cross met them in the hotel lobby, already carrying his briefcase, looking grim but determined. "Remember what we practiced," he said as they walked to the courthouse. "Answer questions directly. Don't volunteer information. If you don't know something, say so. Don't guess." The courthouse was imposing, all stone and columns, built to intimidate. Inside, the halls echoed with footsteps and low voices. Cross led them to a hearing room on the 2nd floor. Jonathan Vance was already there. He sat at the front table with his legal team, 6 men in expensive suits, papers spread before them, looking confident and prepared. Vance himself wore the expression of a man who'd already won and was just waiting for everyone else to acknowledge it. His eyes found Lydia as they entered. Something cold passed across his face, then disappeared behind professional neutrality. Lydia's steps faltered. Everett put a hand on her back, kept her moving forward. They took their seats at the opposite table. David versus Goliath. Except in the Bible, David won. The judge entered, a heavy-set man in his 60s, robes swishing, expression already tired. He settled behind the bench, surveyed both tables, then nodded to the court clerk. In the matter of Jonathan Vance versus Lydia Hale, petition for declaration of mental incompetence, let's begin. Vance's lead attorney stood first, a silver-haired man named Whitmore, who moved with the casual confidence of someone who'd never lost a case he cared about. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. Jonathan Vance is a concerned father seeking to protect his daughter from the consequences of mental instability. We have documentation from 3 physicians, all of whom have evaluated Miss Vance. Mrs. Hale, Cross interrupted, standing. Her legal name is Mrs. Lydia Hale. She's married. Whitmore didn't miss a beat. The validity of that marriage is precisely what's in question. As our petition clearly states, Miss Vance entered into this arrangement while in a state of emotional and mental distress that rendered her incapable of informed consent. The judge, Henderson, according to the nameplate on his bench, looked over his glasses at Cross. Counsel, you'll have your chance to respond. Mr. Whitmore, continue. Whitmore nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. As I was saying, we have medical evidence. We have witness testimony. We have a clear pattern of irrational behavior culminating in Miss Vance fleeing her home, abandoning her family, and entering into marriage with a complete stranger. He gestured toward Everett like he was pointing out evidence at a crime scene. A stranger who advertised for a wife in a newspaper, who specifically requested someone plain and uncomplicated, who by his own admission sought a woman who wouldn't ask questions. Everett felt heat crawl up his neck. Hearing his own words thrown back at him like proof of wrongdoing made his stomach turn. We're not here to impugn Mr. Hale's character, Whitmore continued, though his tone suggested otherwise. But the facts speak for themselves. A vulnerable young woman, isolated from her support system, entered into a hasty marriage with a man she'd never met. This is not the behavior of a rational, competent adult. This is the behavior of someone in crisis. Someone who needs protection from others and from herself. He sat down. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the clerk's pen. Judge Henderson looked at Cross. Your response? Cross stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, nothing like Whitmore's dramatic flourishes. Your Honor, Mr. Whitmore is correct about one thing. This is straightforward, not because Mrs. Hale is incompetent, but because she isn't. She's an adult woman who made an adult decision to escape an intolerable situation. The real question before this court isn't whether she's competent. It's whether her father has the right to control her life simply because he disagrees with her choices. That's a mischaracterization, Whitmore started, but Henderson raised a hand. You'll get your turn, counsel. Let him speak. Cross nodded his thanks. Mrs. Hale is 26 years old. She's educated, articulate, and perfectly capable of managing her own affairs. Before she left her father's house, she handled complex accounting for his business operations. She negotiated with suppliers, she managed household staff. No one questioned her competence then. He paused, letting that sink in. The only thing that changed is that she refused to marry the man her father chose for her. 3 times she refused, and rather than accept her decision, Mr. Vance attempted to force her compliance. He locked her in her room. He posted guards. He told her she had no choice in the matter. Vance's expression didn't change, but something tightened around his eyes. Running from that situation wasn't irrational, Your Honor. It was self-preservation, and marrying Mr. Hale wasn't a mistake. It was a solution, a legal arrangement that gave her protection and independence. Cross glanced at the medical reports stacked in front of Whitmore. As for these so-called evaluations, none of these doctors have ever met Mrs. Hale. They based their conclusions entirely on second-hand accounts provided by Mr. Vance himself. That's not medical evidence. That's advocacy dressed up as diagnosis. Henderson leaned back in his chair. Mr. Whitmore, is that accurate? These doctors never examined the respondent? Whitmore stood again. Given that Miss Vance fled the state, direct examination was impossible. However, these are respected physicians who reviewed extensive documentation. Documentation provided solely by the petitioner, Cross cut in. Your Honor, I'd like to call Mrs. Hale to testify. Let the court see for itself whether she's capable of rational thought and clear communication. Henderson considered this. Mr. Whitmore, Do you object? We'd prefer to present our evidence first, Your Honor. Establish the pattern of behavior before. I'll allow it. Mrs. Hale, please take the stand. Lydia stood. Her hands were steady, but Everett could see the tension in her shoulders as she walked to the witness box. She placed her hand on the Bible the clerk offered, swore to tell the truth, and sat. Cross approached with papers in hand, but his manner was gentle. Not like he was interrogating a hostile witness, more like he was giving her space to speak. Mrs. Hale, can you state your full name for the record? Lydia Marie Vance Hale. And you are currently married to Everett Hail? Yes. How did you meet your husband? Through a mail order advertisement. He was seeking a wife. I responded. Why? Lydia's gaze didn't waver. Because I needed to get away from my father, and marriage to someone far from his influence seemed like the safest option. What were you running from? An arranged marriage. My father had negotiated an engagement to Senator Hartford's son without consulting me. When I refused, he made it clear my consent wasn't required. Cross nodded. Can you describe what happened when you refused? The first time he told me I was being foolish, that I didn't understand what was best for me. The second time he threatened to cut off my access to money and social connections. The third time he had me confined to my room. Guards outside the door. No visitors allowed except for the Hartford family and my father's associates. Her voice stayed level, but her hands gripped the edge of the witness box. He told me I would marry William Hartford whether I wanted to or not, that he'd drag me to the altar if necessary. Did you believe him? Yes. My father doesn't make empty threats. So you ran? Yes. Walk me through that decision. How did you plan it? Execute it? Lydia straightened. I waited until I knew the guard rotation. There was a 2-hour window on Wednesday nights when the staff changed shifts. I packed a single bag with essentials. I'd already sold some jewelry through a housemaid, my mother's pieces, things my father didn't inventory regularly. The money bought passage west and enough to live on for a few weeks. She paused. I changed my name at every stop, paid for separate tickets, made sure I wasn't followed. By the time I reached Holt's Crossing, I'd crossed 6 states and used 4 different names. Amapaset. Cross smiled slightly. That sounds like careful planning, rational thought. It was necessary. When you arrived in Holt's Crossing and met Mr. Hale for the first time, did you feel pressured to go through with the marriage? No, he gave me space, asked if I was sure, made it clear I could change my mind. But you didn't. No, because he offered what I needed, distance from my father and a legal status that would make it harder to drag me back. And now, months later, how would you characterize your marriage? Lydia was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, something in her voice had softened. It's not what either of us expected, but it's real. We work together. We make decisions together. He doesn't try to control me or tell me what to think. That's more respect than I ever got from my father. Cross turned to face Whitmore. Does this sound like an incompetent woman to you, counselor? Whitmore rose smoothly. It sounds like a woman who's convinced herself that running away solved her problems. Your Honor, may I cross-examine? Henderson nodded. Proceed. Whitmore approached the witness stand with the careful steps of a hunter approaching prey. His smile was pleasant, professional, dangerous. Mrs. Hale? Or do you prefer Miss Vance? Mrs. Hale. Mrs. Hale, then. You testified that you sold your mother's jewelry to fund your escape, jewelry that legally belonged to your father's estate. Lydia's expression cooled. My mother left those pieces to me in her will. A will that was never properly executed because your mother died intestate, which means the jewelry passed to your father as her surviving spouse. So you sold property that wasn't yours to sell. Would you call that rational behavior? I'd call it survival. You'd call theft survival. Cross stood. Objection. Counsel is mischaracterizing the ownership. Sustained, Henderson said. Mr. Whitmore, stick to the facts. Whitmore nodded, unbothered. Let's talk about your marriage. You met Mr. Hale once before marrying him. Once, is that correct? Yes. Did you know anything about him? His history? His character? His financial situation? I knew what I needed to know. Which was what, exactly? That he wanted a wife who wouldn't ask questions? That seems like a red flag, doesn't it? A man seeking someone who won't be curious or demanding? It seemed like honesty. He was clear about what he wanted. I appreciated that. Or were you so desperate to escape your father that you'd have married anyone? Any stranger who offered a way out? Lydia's jaw tightened. I wasn't desperate. I was deliberate. Deliberate enough to investigate whether Mr. Hale was a suitable husband, whether he had debts, a criminal history, any history of violence. I trusted my judgment. Based on what? One conversation? One meeting? Whitmore's voice sharpened. Miss Vance, that's not deliberation. That's recklessness. That's the action of someone not thinking clearly. I was thinking perfectly clearly, clearer than I'd been in years. Were you? Because from where I'm standing, you committed theft, fled across state lines, assumed multiple false identities, and married a stranger based on a newspaper advertisement. Those aren't the actions of a rational, stable person. Those are the actions of someone in crisis. Those are the actions of someone escaping abuse. The word hung in the courtroom. Whitmore paused, recalibrating. Abuse. That's a serious accusation. Did your father ever strike you? No. Threaten you with physical harm? Not directly. Deprive you of food, shelter, medical care? No, but then what abuse are we talking about? The fact that he wanted you to marry well, to secure your future, that he arranged an advantageous match with a respected family? Whitmore's tone dripped with condescension. Miss Vance, many fathers arrange marriages for their daughters. It's not abuse, it's parental guidance. Lydia leaned forward, voice sharp. It's control. It's treating me like property to be traded for political favor. My father didn't care who William Hartford was or what kind of man he'd be to me. He cared about the senator's support for his railroad expansion. I was leverage. That's all I ever was to him. Or maybe you were a beloved daughter he wanted to protect from making foolish decisions, like running away and marrying a failing rancher you'd never met. Objection, Cross said, standing. Counsel is testifying instead of questioning. I'll rephrase, Whitmore said before Henderson could rule. Mrs. Hale, is it possible that your father's actions came from concern rather than malice? That he genuinely believed you were making a mistake? No. My father doesn't act from concern, he acts from self-interest. That's your perception, but perception isn't fact, is it? Especially when you're under stress, when you're not thinking clearly. Whitmore picked up one of the medical reports. Dr. Morrison's evaluation notes that you exhibited signs of paranoid thinking, seeing malicious intent where none existed. Does that sound familiar? I'm not paranoid. My father sent men after me. That's not imagined. He sent men to bring you home safely, to make sure you weren't hurt or taken advantage of. Whitmore's voice softened, became almost paternal. Miss Vance, no one here doubts that you believe your father meant you harm, but belief isn't the same as reality, and the fact that you can't distinguish between the two is exactly why this hearing is necessary. Lydia's hands were shaking now. Everett wanted to stand, to interrupt, to do something, but Cross had warned him, let her handle it. She's stronger than she looks. I know the difference between reality and belief, Lydia said quietly. Reality is that my father locked me in a room. Reality is that he told me my choices didn't matter. Reality is that I had to climb out a window and bribe servants to escape. That's not perception. That's what happened, according to you. But we have no independent verification of these claims, do we? No witnesses except yourself, no documentation, just your word against your father's. Whitmore turned to the judge. Your Honor, I think we've established the pattern here. Miss Vance has constructed a narrative in which she's the victim and her father is the villain. She's convinced herself this narrative is true to the point where she can't see other possibilities. That's not rationality. That's delusion. She's not delusional, Cross said, rising again. She's a woman who escaped an impossible situation and built a new life. That takes courage and clarity, not mental illness. Henderson held up a hand. Gentlemen, I've heard enough for now. Mr. Whitmore, do you have additional witnesses? We do, Your Honor. We'd like to call Mr. Jonathan Vance to provide context for his daughter's behavior. Lydia went rigid in the witness box. Everett watched her father stand, smooth his jacket, and walk to the front of the room like he owned it. Maybe he did. Maybe he owned the whole courtroom, the judge, the outcome. Vance took the oath with the easy confidence of a man who'd testified before. Probably at congressional hearings, regulatory boards, places where his word carried weight. Whitmore began gently. Mr. Vance, can you describe your relationship with your daughter? I love Lydia deeply. She's my only child. After her mother died, she became the center of my world. Vance's voice was warm, concerned, nothing like the cold anger Everett had seen at the ranch. I tried to give her every advantage, the best education, social connections, opportunities most women never receive. And the proposed marriage to William Hartford? William is a good man from a good family, educated, principled, financially stable. I thought he'd be an excellent match for Lydia. I still do. Vance sighed. But when I raised the possibility, Lydia became increasingly agitated, irrational. She accused me of trying to sell her, which is absurd. I've never treated my daughter as property. How did you respond to her objections? I tried to reason with her, to explain the benefits of the match. But she wouldn't listen. She became paranoid, claiming I was trying to control her. When she started talking about running away, I became concerned for her safety. I had to take precautions. What kind of precautions? I asked the household staff to keep an eye on her, make sure she didn't do anything reckless. It wasn't imprisonment, as she's claimed. It was protective oversight. Everett felt his hands curl into fists under the table. The way Vance told it, locking Lydia in her room became concerned supervision. Control became protection. Every fact twisted just enough to sound reasonable. When did you learn she'd left? Whitmore asked. 3 days after she escaped. The housemaid who helped her finally confessed. By then, Lydia had a significant head start. Vance's expression turned pained. I was frantic. I hired investigators to find her, not to drag her back, but to ensure she was safe, to make sure she hadn't fallen into worse hands. And when you found her married to Mr. Hale? I was devastated. My daughter, a cultured, educated woman, married to a stranger from a newspaper advertisement, living on a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere. It confirmed my worst fears. She wasn't thinking clearly. She was running from imagined threats into real danger. What kind of danger? Vance's gaze shifted to Everett, cold and assessing. Mr. Hale may be a decent man. I don't know. But his advertisement specifically requested someone who wouldn't ask questions. What kind of man wants a wife who won't be curious? What is he hiding? Everett started to rise, but Cross put a hand on his arm. Stay calm. Don't react. Furthermore, Vance continued, Mr. Hale's ranch is deeply in debt. He's been overcharged by suppliers for months without noticing. His operation is barely solvent. What happens when it fails completely? What happens to my daughter then? Objection, Cross said. Mr. Vance is speculating about the future and making unfounded accusations about my client's character. Sustained. Mr. Vance, stick to facts you can verify. Vance nodded. The fact is, my daughter left a secure, comfortable life to marry a man she didn't know. That's not rational behavior. That's the behavior of someone who needs help. Whitmore smiled. Thank you, Mr. Vance. No further questions. Cross stood for cross-examination. His approach was different from Whitmore's, less theatrical, more surgical. Mr. Vance, you testified that you love your daughter deeply. I do. Then why did you have her confined to her room when she refused the engagement? I didn't confine her. I asked the staff to keep watch. Did she have freedom to leave her room? A pause. Not without supervision. Could she go outside? Not alone, for her safety. Could she have visitors? Selected visitors, family friends, the Hartfords. But not friends of her own choosing? I was concerned about outside influences. Cross nodded slowly. So she couldn't leave her room freely, couldn't go outside alone, couldn't see people without your approval. Most people would call that confinement, Mr. Vance. What would you call it? Protection. From what? From making irreversible mistakes. Like refusing to marry William Hartford. Vance's jaw tightened. Like running away. She hadn't run away yet. You confined her before she ran. So what were you protecting her from? Her own choices? From choices made in emotional distress. Who determined she was in emotional distress? Did you have her evaluated by a doctor? I didn't need a doctor to tell me my daughter wasn't thinking clearly. But you need doctors now to declare her incompetent. Isn't that convenient? Cross picked up the medical reports. These evaluations were performed by doctors who never met Mrs. Hale. They based their conclusions entirely on information you provided. Information that painted her in the worst possible light. correct? I provided accurate information about her behavior. Your version of her behavior. Your interpretation. Your narrative. Cross set the reports down. Mr. Vance, isn't it true that you're not concerned about your daughter's mental health? You're concerned about your loss of control over her life? That's absurd. Is it? You arranged a marriage she didn't want. She refused. You confined her. She escaped. You sent men after her. She married someone else. You sued for annulment and incompetency. At every step, when Mrs. Hale exercises independence, you try to override it. That's not concern. That's control. Vance's composure cracked slightly. I'm her father. I have the right to guide her decisions. She's 26 years old. She's an adult. What right do you have to guide anything? The right of a parent who knows better than a child what's... She's not a child, Mr. Vance. She's a grown woman. And the only thing you know better than her is how to manipulate courts and doctors into agreeing with you. Objection. Objection. Whitmore was on his feet. Counsel is making speeches instead of asking questions. Withdrawn, Cross said smoothly. He turned back to Vance. Let me ask you this. If Mrs. Hale is declared competent today and chooses to remain with Mr. Hale, will you accept that decision? The silence stretched. Vance's expression hardened. No, he said finally. Because she's not competent to make that decision. That's why we're here. And if a doctor examined her today and found her perfectly rational, then that doctor would be wrong. Cross smiled without humor. In other words, the only acceptable outcome for you is the one where you get your daughter back, where you regain control. Everything else, her choices, her marriage, her life, is irrelevant. I want what's best for my daughter. No, Mr. Vance, you want what you've decided is best. There's a difference. Cross looked at the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Vance stepped down, his face tight with barely controlled anger. As he passed their table, his eyes locked on Lydia for just a moment. The look wasn't loving or concerned. It was cold calculation, a promise that this wasn't over. Henderson called for a 15-minute recess. Everett and Lydia followed Cross out into the hallway. How bad is it? Everett asked when they were alone in a side corridor. Cross leaned against the wall, looking exhausted. Hard to say. Henderson's playing it close. But Vance's testimony hurt us. He came across as the concerned father, reasonable, measured. He lied, Lydia said. He shaded the truth. There's a difference, legally speaking. And Whitmore's narrative is compelling. Troubled daughter makes rash decisions, loving father tries to protect her. It's a story judges have heard before. It's comfortable, familiar. What do? We put Everett on the stand. Show that their marriage is real, that you're building a life together. Undermine the idea that this was just an escape plan. Cross looked at Everett. They're going to come at you hard. Make you look like a predator or a fool. Probably both. Can you handle that? Everett thought about Lydia's face when Vance testified. About the way she'd held herself together while her father twisted every truth into something ugly. If she could do that, he could handle whatever Whitmore threw at him. Yeah, I can handle it. They filed back into the courtroom. Henderson returned to the bench, shuffled some papers, then nodded to Cross. Call your next witness. The defense calls Everett Hail. Everett stood, walked to the witness box, took the oath. His hands were steady, but his heart hammered against his ribs. Cross started simple. Mr. Hale, why did you place that advertisement for a wife? Because I was lonely. My first wife died 3 years ago. I'd been alone since then. Thought maybe it was time to try again. Why not court someone locally? Why advertise? Everett considered lying, making it sound better than it was, but Cross had told him the truth was the only thing that would work. Because I didn't want romance, didn't want expectations I couldn't meet. I was clear about that in the ad. Practical arrangement, no frills. Figured if I was honest up front, I'd get someone who wanted the same thing. And you got Mrs. Hale's response. Got 4 responses. Hers was the only one that didn't talk about love or destiny or any of that. Just said she needed distance and could handle the work. That's what I wanted. When she arrived, what was your first impression? That she was running from something. Could see it in how she looked around, how she kept her bag close. I figured she had her reasons. I had mine. Seemed fair. Did you ask what she was running from? Not at first. She didn't volunteer it. I didn't push. When did you learn about her father? About the forced engagement? The day after Calder showed up. That's when she told me everything. And what did you do with that information? Everett met Lydia's eyes across the courtroom. I decided to stand with her, make the marriage legal, face down whoever her father sent. Why? The question hung there. Everett knew the answer mattered. Knew Whitmore would rip apart anything that sounded weak or calculated. Because she'd done something I couldn't, he said finally. She'd walked into my house and opened a door I'd kept closed for 3 years. Made me deal with things I'd been hiding from. That took guts, took strength. And when her father's man showed up threatening her, I figured the least I could do was show the same kind of courage she'd shown me. Cross nodded. How would you characterize your relationship with Mrs. Hale now? Still figuring it out, honestly. We work well together. She's smart with numbers, better than me. Fix problems I didn't even know I had. We talk, make decisions together. It's not what I expected when I placed that ad, but it's real. It's good. Do you believe she's mentally incompetent? No, she's the most competent person I've ever met. Cross sat down. Whitmore rose like a shark scenting blood. Mr. Hale, you testified that you wanted someone who wouldn't ask questions. Why is that? Didn't want complications. What kind of complications? The kind that come with expectations, with people wanting more than I could give. What couldn't you give? Everett shifted in his seat. Emotional availability, I guess you'd call it. I'd been grieving. Wasn't ready for someone expecting me to be something I wasn't. So you wanted someone who wouldn't demand emotional connection. Someone who'd just, what? Cook and clean and not bother you? Isn't that exactly what you advertised for? Someone plain and uncomplicated? Someone who wouldn't make your life difficult? I wanted honesty, clear expectations. Or you wanted someone vulnerable enough to accept a bad deal, someone desperate. Whitmore's voice sharpened. Mrs. Hale was desperate, wasn't she? Running from her father. No money, no support system, vulnerable, easy to manipulate. I didn't manipulate anyone, didn't you? You offered shelter and protection to a woman in crisis. You married her quickly, before she could think clearly about what she was doing. You isolated her on a remote ranch where she'd be dependent on you. That sounds like manipulation to me. She wanted to be there. She chose it. Did she? Or did you present it as her only option? Marry you or face her father alone? Anger flared in Everett's chest. That's not how it happened. Then how did it happen? Walk me through the proposal. Did you get down on one knee, profess your love? No, we talked about making it legal, for protection. How romantic. And Mrs. Hale agreed immediately. She thought about it first, asked questions, made her own decision. After how long? An hour? A day? We discussed it that night, filed papers the next morning. Whitmore smiled. So within 24 hours of learning about her father's pursuit, you convinced a frightened, vulnerable woman to legally bind herself to you. Does that sound like informed consent or coercion? It was her choice. Was it? Or was she so scared that she'd have agreed to anything that promised safety? Whitmore picked up a document. Mr. Hale, I have the financial records for your ranch. You're carrying significant debt. Your operation runs at a loss most months. You've been struggling for years. Is that accurate? The ranch has had rough years. And suddenly you have a wife who's brilliant with numbers, who can fix your books, negotiate better deals, turn your failing operation around. Quite convenient. That's not why I married her. No? Then why did you marry her so quickly? Why rush? Why not wait? Let her settle in. See if you are actually compatible. Because her father was coming after her. We needed the legal protection. Or because you saw an opportunity. A desperate woman with valuable skills and a rich father. Even if the marriage failed, you'd gain financially from the arrangement. Everett's hands gripped the edge of the witness box. I don't want Vance's money. But you'd take Mrs. Hale's skills, her labor, her ability to save your failing ranch. She offered. I didn't force her. You didn't have to force her. She was already vulnerable, already desperate. All you had to do was provide the illusion of safety. Whitmore turned to face the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Hale may believe he acted with good intentions, but the facts show a pattern of a man taking advantage of a woman in crisis. Whether he meant to manipulate her or not, the result is the same. Mrs. Hale entered into marriage under duress, without clear judgment, to a man who benefited substantially from her desperation. "That's a damn lie," Everett said, voice hard. Henderson banged his gavel. "Mr. Hale, control yourself. He's twisting everything. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. Do you understand?" Everett forced himself to nod, to sit back, to breathe. Whitmore looked satisfied. "No further questions, Your Honor." Cross stood for redirect, but the damage was done. Everett could see it in Henderson's expression, doubt. The comfortable narrative Whitmore had built, vulnerable woman, opportunistic man, had taken root. The rest of the afternoon blurred. Whitmore called his medical witnesses, doctors who'd never met Lydia but spoke with confidence about her paranoid delusions and emotional instability. Cross objected to every other sentence, but Henderson allowed most of it. By the time they adjourned for the day, Everett felt like he'd been beaten. They walked back to the hotel in silence. Inside their rooms, Lydia finally spoke. "We're going to lose." Everett wanted to argue, to say Cross would pull it out, that Henderson would see through Vance's lies, but he couldn't make the words come. Maybe. "And then what? My father drags me back, forces the marriage to Hartford, and you're left with legal bills you can't pay and a ranch that's already failing. Then we figure something else out." "There is nothing else, Everett, don't you see? My father wins. He always wins." She sat on the bed, hands in her lap, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her, defeated. Everett crossed the room, sat beside her. "You remember what you said that first night, when we were clearing Rachel's room?" "I said a lot of things." "You said you couldn't sleep in a shrine, that I couldn't keep one forever, that we'd deal with it now or you'd find somewhere else to stay." He took her hand. "You weren't wrong. I'd been living in a shrine, a whole life built around grief and closed doors, and you walked in and opened every one of them, made me face things I'd been running from." "What's your point?" "My point is you don't know how to quit, even when things look impossible, even when you're scared. You keep pushing forward, so don't start now. Don't let your father win because you're tired of fighting." She looked at him, eyes bright. "What if fighting isn't enough?" "Then we go down swinging, but we don't surrender. Not while we're still standing." For a long moment, she just sat there. Then slowly, something shifted in her expression. The defeat faded. Not gone, but pushed back, held at bay by sheer stubbornness. "All right," she said quietly. "We keep fighting." That night, neither of them slept much. But when morning came, they got up, got dressed, went back to the courthouse, ready for whatever came next. The courtroom felt smaller on the second day. Or maybe Everett just felt the walls closing in. He sat beside Lydia at the defense table, watching Cross shuffle through papers with the focused intensity of a man running out of options. Henderson took the bench at 9 sharp. No preamble, no pleasantries. Just a tired judge looking at a case he probably wished would disappear. "Mr. Cross, any additional witnesses?" Cross stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to call Tom Fletcher." Everett blinked. Tom hadn't mentioned coming to Denver, hadn't said anything about testifying. But there he was, walking through the courtroom door in his Sunday clothes, looking uncomfortable but determined. Tom took the oath and settled into the witness box, hands folded in his lap like he was waiting for a sermon to start. "Mr. Fletcher," Cross began, "how do you know the Hales?" "Everett's been my neighbor for near about 15 years, since before his first wife passed." "And you've observed his marriage to Mrs. Hale?" "Some. Enough." "What's your impression of their relationship?" Tom scratched his jaw, thinking. "Well, they work together, real partnership-like. I seen her fixing his books, negotiating with suppliers. Smart woman, sharp. And Everett, he listens to her, takes her opinion serious. That's more than most men do with their wives. I'll tell you that." "Does Mrs. Hale seem incompetent to you?" "Hell no. Pardon my language, Your Honor. But that woman's got more sense than half the men in Holt's Crossing put together. She squared away Everett's accounts in a week, caught people who'd been stealing from him for months. If that's incompetent, I'd like to be that useless." A few people in the gallery chuckled. Henderson's mouth twitched, might have been a smile. Whitmore rose. "Objection. The witness isn't qualified to diagnose mental competency." Sustained. "Mr. Cross, stick to observations, not conclusions." Cross nodded. "Mr. Fletcher, have you witnessed any behavior from Mrs. Hale that seemed irrational or unstable?" "No, sir. Opposite, actually. Woman's level-headed as they come. When that fellow Calder came around asking questions, trying to stir up trouble, she handled it calm. Didn't panic, didn't fall apart, just dealt with it. What about Mr. Hale? In your opinion, is he the type of man who would take advantage of a vulnerable woman? Tom snorted. Everett? No. That man's so honest, it's damn near painful sometimes. Begging your pardon, again, Your Honor. But he wouldn't cheat nobody. Not in business, not in marriage, not in nothing. Cross let that sit for a moment. Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. No further questions. Further. Whitmore approached for cross-examination, but his heart didn't seem in it. Tom Fletcher was exactly what he appeared to be. A plain-spoken rancher with no agenda beyond telling the truth as he saw it. Hard to discredit that. Mr. Fletcher, you've known Mr. Hale for 15 years, but you've only known Mrs. Hale for a few months, correct? That's right. So your observations are limited. You haven't seen the full scope of her behavior. You don't know her history. Don't need to know her whole history to see she's got a good head on her shoulders. But you can't speak to her mental state before she arrived in Holt's Crossing. You can't testify about the decisions that led her to flee her home and marry a stranger. No, but I can testify that whatever she was running from, she found something better, and that don't strike me as crazy. Whitmore tried a few more angles, but Tom was immovable. Simple, honest, and impossible to shake. Finally, Whitmore gave up and Tom stepped down, nodding once at Everett as he passed. Cross called two more witnesses, the widow Henderson from the boarding house, and Jacob Morrison, the local lawyer. Both testified to Lydia's rationality, her competence, her clear-headed handling of business and personal matters. Neither was dramatic or particularly eloquent, but together they painted a picture of a woman who functioned perfectly well in the world. Whitmore countered with his own witnesses. A society woman from back east who'd known the Vance family, who testified that Lydia had always been high-strung and prone to dramatics. A business associate of Jonathan Vance who described Lydia as fragile and oversensitive. All of them people who stood to gain from staying in Vance's good graces. All of them repeating variations of the same script. By midday, Henderson called for a lunch recess. Everett, Lydia, and Cross found a quiet corner in a nearby restaurant. "How do you think it's going?" Lydia asked, pushing food around her plate without eating. Cross didn't sugarcoat it. "We're holding our own," Tom helped, but Whitmore's building momentum with the society angle, painting you as unstable in your previous life. Rational only after being isolated from your normal environment. So what do? We need something that shifts the narrative. Something Henderson can't ignore. Cross set down his fork. "Lydia, is there anyone from your past who could testify on your behalf? Someone who knew you before all this? Someone your father doesn't control?" Lydia was quiet for a long moment. "There might be one person. My mother's sister, Aunt Catherine. She lives in Chicago. My father cut off contact with her years ago. They had a falling out over the railroad business." "Would she testify?" "I don't know. We haven't spoken in years." "Can you reach her?" "Not in time for this hearing. Even if I telegraphed today, she couldn't get here before Henderson makes his ruling." Cross drummed his fingers on the table. "Then we need to work with what we have. This afternoon, I'll make closing arguments. Lay out the facts, emphasize your competency, your rational decision-making. It's not flashy, but it's solid." "Will it be enough?" Everett asked. "Honestly, I don't know. Henderson's hard to read. He could go either way." They finished lunch in silence and returned to the courthouse. The afternoon session started with Whitmore's remaining medical witnesses, more doctors who'd never met Lydia, all singing the same tune. Paranoid thinking, emotional instability, impaired judgment. Cross objected to everything he could, but Henderson was allowing the testimony, building a record. Finally, at 3 o'clock, Henderson called for closing arguments. Whitmore went first. He stood before the bench with the practiced ease of a man who'd done this 100 times. "Your Honor, the evidence in this case is clear. Miss Lydia Vance is a troubled young woman who made a series of increasingly poor decisions culminating in a hasty marriage to a stranger. Her father, Jonathan Vance, is a concerned parent seeking to protect his daughter from herself and from those who would exploit her vulnerability." He gestured toward Everett without looking at him. "Mr. Hale may have had good intentions. I'm willing to believe that. But intentions don't change facts. He advertised for a woman who wouldn't ask questions. He married Miss Vance within days of meeting her. He benefited substantially from her skills and labor. Whether he intended to exploit her or not, the result is exploitation. Whitmore picked up the stack of medical evaluations. We have expert testimony from multiple physicians, all of whom agree that Miss Vance's behavior indicates mental instability. We have witnesses who've known her for years who testify to her fragile emotional state. We have documented evidence of increasingly erratic behavior, theft of jewelry, flight across state lines under assumed names, marriage to a stranger based on a newspaper advertisement. He paused, letting it sink in. Your Honor, this isn't about control. This is about protection. Miss Vance is not capable of making rational decisions about her own welfare. She needs guidance. She needs the support system her father can provide. She needs to be removed from a situation that, while perhaps well-intentioned, is ultimately harmful to her mental and emotional well-being. Whitmore sat down. Cross stood, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, Mr. Whitmore has constructed a compelling narrative. Troubled daughter, concerned father, opportunistic stranger. It's a story that makes sense. It's comfortable, familiar. Cross walked toward the bench. It's also wrong. He picked up a single sheet of paper, the marriage certificate. This document represents a choice, not a mistake, not a delusion, a choice. Mrs. Lydia Hale, and that is her legal name, regardless of what Mr. Whitmore prefers to call her, is a competent adult who made a rational decision to escape an intolerable situation. Cross set the certificate down. Let's talk about that situation. Mr. Vance testified that he was providing protective oversight when he confined his daughter to her room. Let's call it what it was, imprisonment. He locked her in, posted guards, denied her freedom of movement. Why? Because she refused to marry the man he'd chosen for her. He turned to face Vance directly. Mrs. Hale's crime, in her father's eyes, was exercising her right to say no. 3 times she refused this engagement. 3 times he ignored her refusal. He didn't respect her decision. He didn't accept her autonomy. He treated her like property to be traded for political advantage. Cross's voice hardened. Running from that wasn't irrational. It was survival. And marrying Mr. Hale wasn't a mistake. It was a solution, a legal arrangement that provided protection and independence. Yes, it was quick. Yes, it was unconventional. But it was deliberate. Mrs. Hale planned her escape carefully. She secured funds, arranged transportation, covered her tracks. Those aren't the actions of someone in a paranoid delusion. Those are the actions of someone thinking clearly under pressure. He gestured toward Tom Fletcher in the gallery. We've heard from multiple witnesses who've observed Mrs. Hale's behavior since her arrival in Holt's Crossing. All of them, every single one, testified to her rationality, her competence, her clear judgment. She fixed Mr. Hale's accounts. She negotiated better business deals. She managed household operations efficiently. She handled confrontation with Calder and with her father himself with remarkable composure. Cross picked up the medical reports. As for these evaluations, they're worthless. Not one of these doctors has met Mrs. Hale. Not one has conducted a proper examination. They base their conclusions entirely on second-hand information provided by Mr. Vance, a man with a clear bias and a vested interest in the outcome of this hearing. He set the reports down with a thud. Your Honor, if we declare Mrs. Hale incompetent based on this evidence, we're setting a dangerous precedent. We're saying that any adult woman who defies her father's wishes can be declared mentally unstable. We're saying that exercising personal autonomy is evidence of mental illness. We're saying that a woman's choices only matter if a man approves of them. Cross let that hang in the air. That's not justice. That's control. And it's exactly what Mrs. Hale was running from. He walked back to the defense table. Mrs. Hale doesn't need protection from herself or from Mr. Hale. She needs protection from a father who refuses to accept that his daughter is an adult with the right to make her own decisions. I'm asking this court to provide that protection by denying Mr. Vance's petition and affirming Mrs. Hale's competency. Cross sat down. The courtroom was silent. Henderson leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. I'll take this under advisement. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 for my ruling. The gavel fell. They filed out of the courtroom into the late afternoon sun. Everett felt hollowed out, wrung dry. Beside him, Lydia walked with her shoulders straight and her face blank, holding it together through sheer force of will. Tom Fletcher caught up with them on the courthouse steps. I'm heading back tonight, he said. Need to get to my own place. But I wanted to say, whatever happens, you two did right. Stood up when most folks would have laid down. That counts for something. Thank you for coming. Lydia said quietly. For testifying. Tom shrugged. Couldn't let that Vance fellow have his way unchallenged. Wouldn't be right. He shook Everett's hand. I'll keep an eye on your ranch until you get back. He walked away, leaving them standing on the steps. Cross had already disappeared, probably back to his hotel to prepare for whatever tomorrow brought. I need to walk, Lydia said. I can't go back to that hotel room and just sit. All right. They walked through Denver as the sun set, neither speaking, just moving through streets that didn't care about their troubles, past people who had no idea what they were facing. Finally, Lydia stopped in front of a small park. A few trees, some benches, nothing special. She sat down heavily. What if Henderson rules against us tomorrow? Then we appeal. With what money? Cross barely agreed to take the case at all. We can't afford an appeal. We'll figure it out. Stop saying that. Her voice cracked. Stop pretending we have endless options. We don't. If we lose tomorrow, my father wins. I go back. And you're left with debts and a ranch you can't save and a marriage that was annulled before it ever really started. Everett sat beside her. You think I care about the ranch more than you? You should. It's your livelihood, your home. I'm someone who showed up and complicated everything. You want to know what the ranch was before you showed up? A place I went through the motions, fed animals, mended fences, kept everything running just enough to not fail completely. But I wasn't living, I was just existing, going through days without feeling any of them. He looked at her. You changed that. Not because you fixed my books or negotiated better deals. Because you made me care again. Made me remember what it feels like to want something enough to fight for it. And if fighting isn't enough, then at least I fought. At least I tried. That's more than I've done in 3 years. She leaned against him, just slightly. A small surrender to exhaustion and fear. They sat like that as darkness fell. Two people carrying more weight than they should have to, trying to figure out how to keep standing. Eventually, they walked back to the hotel. Separate rooms, separate beds, but somehow less alone than either had been in a long time. Morning came cold and gray. Everett woke before dawn, dressed, and knocked on Lydia's door. She answered, already dressed, face pale but composed. Ready? He asked. No, but let's go anyway. They met Cross in the courthouse lobby. He looked like he hadn't slept. Whatever happens, he said, I want you to know this was a good case. We made them work for it. That's all we could do. They took their seats as Henderson entered. The judge looked as tired as everyone else. Maybe he hadn't slept either. Maybe this case had kept him up, turning over facts and laws and precedents. I've reviewed the evidence and testimony presented over the past 2 days, Henderson said, reading from notes. This is a difficult case because both sides present compelling arguments based on the same set of facts. Everett felt Lydia's hand find his under the table. Her fingers were ice cold. Mr. Vance clearly loves his daughter and wants what he believes is best for her. That much is evident. However, wanting what's best and having the right to enforce that are two different things. Henderson looked up from his notes. Mrs. Hale is 26 years old. She's educated, articulate, and by all accounts presented to this court, fully capable of managing her own affairs. Everett felt a flutter of hope. Lydia's grip tightened. The medical evaluations submitted by the petitioner are troubling in their methodology. Not one of the evaluating physicians met with Mrs. Hale directly. Their conclusions are based entirely on secondhand accounts, which introduces significant bias. Henderson set the reports aside. I'm not persuaded that these evaluations meet the standard required to declare an adult incompetent. Vance's face was stone. Whitmore leaned over, whispering something urgently. As for the marriage itself, I find that while unconventional, it does not appear to be the result of coercion or impaired judgment. Mrs. Hale had resources, albeit limited. She had the ability to make other choices. She chose marriage to Mr. Hale as a legal solution to a difficult problem. That's strategic thinking, not mental illness. Henderson looked directly at Lydia. Mrs. Hale, do you wish to remain married to Mr. Hale? Lydia stood. Yes, Your Honor, I do. And you understand that by making this choice, you're potentially severing your relationship with your father? I understand, and I accept that consequence. Henderson nodded slowly. Then this court finds insufficient evidence to declare Mrs. Lydia Hale mentally incompetent. The petition is denied. The words hit like thunder. Everett felt the breath he'd been holding release all at once. Furthermore, Henderson continued, The petition for annulment is also denied. The marriage between Everett Hail and Lydia Hale is legally valid and will remain so. He banged the gavel. This hearing is concluded. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Cross was shaking Everett's hand, grinning wider than seemed possible. Lydia stood frozen, like she couldn't quite believe what had happened. Across the aisle, Vance rose slowly. His face was carefully neutral, but his eyes burned with cold fury. He said something to Whitmore, then walked toward the exit without looking at his daughter. But at the door he stopped, turned. "This isn't over, Lydia." His voice carried across the courtroom. Quiet. Certain. A promise, not a threat. Then he was gone. Lydia sagged against the table. "We won." "You won," Cross corrected. "You stood up to one of the most powerful men in the territory, and you won." They left the courthouse in a daze. On the steps, in the morning sun, reality started to sink in. "What do we do now?" Lydia asked. "We go home," Everett said. "Back to the ranch. Back to our life." "Just like that?" "Just like that." They caught the afternoon stage out of Denver. The journey back felt different from the journey there, lighter somehow, despite the exhaustion. Like they'd been carrying weight they didn't know how to set down, and Henderson's ruling had finally given them permission. Tom Fletcher met them at the ranch 3 days later, reporting that everything had gone smoothly in their absence. No visits from Calder, no attempts at sabotage, just quiet days and peaceful nights. "Your father might actually accept defeat," Everett said that first night back, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and account book spread between them. Lydia shook her head. "You heard what he said. This isn't over. He'll find another angle, another way to come at us. Then we'll deal with it when it comes." "You're not worried?" "I'm terrified, but I'm also too tired to spend energy on what might happen. Rather focus on what's in front of me." She looked at the books, at the neat columns of numbers she'd been reorganizing. "What is in front of you?" "This ranch. You, building something that works. That's it? That's your whole plan?" "Pretty much." She almost smiled. "That's either wisdom or stupidity. I can't tell which." "Probably both." They fell back into the rhythm of ranch life. Lydia handled the books and negotiations with the efficiency that still amazed Everett. He managed the land and livestock, taking her advice on everything from grazing rotation to equipment purchases. They worked as a team, filling gaps in each other's knowledge, building something stronger than either could have managed alone. Weeks passed, then months. Calder didn't return. No lawyers showed up with new petitions. The threats and danger that had consumed their lives seemed to fade into the background. But Everett noticed Lydia still checked the horizon sometimes, still kept her awareness tuned to approaching riders. The fear hadn't disappeared. It had just gone quiet. One evening in late autumn, Everett found her standing in Rachel's old room, her room now, though they still sometimes slipped and called it by its old name. "You all right?" he asked from the doorway. "I was just thinking. This room used to belong to your wife. Now it's mine. But it's not really mine, is it? It's just a place I'm occupying until something changes." "What do you want it to be?" She turned to face him. "I don't know. That's the problem. I've spent so long running from things, I never learned how to build towards something." "You've built plenty here. The ranch runs better because of you." "The ranch? But what about us?" The question hung between them. In all the months of marriage, of working together, of facing down her father's threats, they'd never really talked about what they were to each other. Partners, yes. Friends, maybe. But beyond that, "What do you want us to be?" Everett asked. "Something real. Not just a legal arrangement for protection, not just a business partnership, something that matters." He crossed the room to stand in front of her. "It already matters. At least to me." "Does it? Or am I just filling space that Rachel left empty?" The words stung because there was truth in them. He had been using Lydia to fill gaps, to patch over grief he hadn't properly dealt with. But somewhere along the way, it had become more than that. "At first, maybe," he admitted, "but not now. Now you're just you. And that's what I want." "What I am is complicated, damaged, carrying baggage that includes a vengeful father and a past I can't completely escape. So? I'm a widower who spent 3 years hiding from life. We're both carrying things. Doesn't mean we can't carry them together." She studied his face, looking for something. Truth, maybe. or commitment. I'm scared, she said quietly. Scared this will fall apart. Scared my father will find a way to destroy it. Scared that I don't actually know how to be a real wife instead of just a convenient one. I'm scared too, but I'd rather be scared with you than alone. She reached up, touched his face. A tentative gesture, like she was testing whether he was real or would disappear. He didn't disappear. Slowly, carefully, they kissed. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming, just two people choosing each other with full knowledge of all the complications and fears and uncertainties that came with it. When they pulled apart, Lydia was crying. This is real now, she said. Isn't it? Yeah, it's real. That night, Everett finally moved Rachel's packed trunk out of his room. Not into storage, not hidden away. He donated the clothes to the church, kept a few small items that mattered, and let the rest go. The room felt different after. Still his, but with space for someone else. For a future instead of just a past. Lydia stayed in her own room that night. They weren't rushing anything. But the next morning at breakfast, she reached across the table and took his hand. I want to make this marriage real in every way, she said. Not because I'm scared or running, because I choose it, because I choose you. I choose you too. Even knowing my father might come after us again? Especially knowing that, because if he does, we'll face it together. She smiled, a real smile, not the careful, controlled expression she usually wore. You're either the bravest man I know or the most foolish. Definitely foolish, but I'm committed to it. 2 weeks later, they received a letter. Not from Vance, but from Lydia's Aunt Catherine in Chicago. Lydia opened it at the kitchen table, hands shaking slightly. She heard about the hearing, Lydia said, scanning the pages. Someone sent her newspaper clippings. She says, her voice caught. She says she's proud of me, that my mother would have been proud too. What else? She wants me to write, wants to rebuild the relationship my father destroyed. Lydia set the letter down carefully. She says the door is always open if I need anything, family support, a place to stay if things go wrong, whatever I need. That's good. It's more than good. It's the first time in years anyone from my old life has acknowledged I made the right choice. She looked up at him, eyes bright. I'm not completely alone anymore. I have you. I have Tom and the Hendersons. I have Aunt Catherine. I have people who care. You've always had people who care. You just couldn't see them before. She stood, walked around the table, and kissed him. Not tentative this time, certain. I love you, she said. I don't think I've ever said that to anyone and meant it, but I mean it now. Everett felt something in his chest loosen, a knot of grief and loneliness that had been there so long he'd forgotten it could be untied. I love you too. It wasn't the ending either of them had expected when they started this arrangement, but it was real, messy and complicated and built on fear and survival as much as anything else. But real. And maybe that was enough. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled against the barn doors and ice formed in the water troughs every morning. Everett and Lydia worked through it the way ranchers did, one frozen day at a time, breaking ice, feeding animals, keeping the operation running despite the cold. They'd settled into something that felt like permanence. Lydia had taken over one corner of the main room as an office, where she managed not just their accounts, but bookkeeping for 3 neighboring ranches. Word had spread about her skills. People trusted her with their numbers. She was building something of her own. Everett watched her work sometimes. The way she'd get so focused she'd forget to eat. The way she'd catch errors that would have cost families their livelihoods. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. But he also noticed the way she still paused when riders approached, the way her hand would drift toward the desk drawer where she kept that small pistol. Some fears didn't disappear just because you wanted them to. 3 months after the hearing, a telegram arrived. Everett brought it in from town, handed it to Lydia without opening it. She stared at the envelope like it might contain poison. You want me to read it first? He asked. No, I need to do this. She opened it carefully. Read. Her face went pale, then blank. What is it? My father had a stroke. He's alive, but paralyzed on his left side, can't speak clearly. She set the telegram down. His business partner sent this. Says my father's been asking for me. Keeps trying to write my name. Everett waited. This was her decision to make. I don't know what to do, she said quietly. Part of me wants to ignore this. Let him die without seeing me. That would be justice, wouldn't it, after everything he did? Would it make you feel better? I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what he wanted to say. Then you have your answer. She looked at him. You'd come with me? To see him? If you want me there. I do. I can't face him alone. Not again. They made arrangements. Tom agreed to watch the ranch again. Lydia wrote to her Aunt Catherine, letting her know they'd be passing through Chicago. Then they packed and caught the train east. The journey took 3 days. Lydia grew quieter the closer they got to her father's estate. By the time they arrived in the city where she'd grown up, she was barely speaking. The Vance mansion sat on a street of other mansions, all competing to show wealth and status. Everett felt out of place in his best clothes, which still looked shabby next to the doorman's uniform. The business partner, a nervous man named Coleman, met them in the foyer. Miss Vance, thank you for coming. Your father's been very agitated. The doctors say seeing you might help. Or it might kill him, Lydia said flatly. Which outcome are you hoping for, Mr. Coleman? Coleman flinched. I just want what's best for the company, for everyone involved. Of course you do. They followed him upstairs to a bedroom that was larger than Everett's entire house. Jonathan Vance lay in a massive bed, propped up by pillows, one side of his face slack and lifeless. When he saw Lydia, his working eye widened. He tried to speak, but the words came out slurred and incomprehensible. Hello, Father, Lydia said. Her voice was steady but cold. I got your message. Vance's working hand scrabbled at the bedside table, grabbing for paper and pen. He managed to grip the pen but couldn't control it well enough to write clearly. After several attempts, he threw it across the room in frustration. Let me, Lydia said. She picked up the pen and paper, sat in the chair beside the bed. I'll write what you say. If you can say it clearly enough. Vance struggled to form words. Finally, painfully, something that might have been sorry emerged. Lydia set down the pen. Are you? Sorry for trying to force me into marriage? Sorry for locking me up? Sorry for dragging me through court? She leaned forward. Or are you just sorry you lost control? Vance made a sound that could have been protest or agreement. His working hand reached toward her. No, Lydia said, pulling back. You don't get to touch me. You don't get forgiveness just because you're dying. You spent my whole life treating me like property, like a chess piece in your political games. The only reason I'm here is to make sure I can live with myself after you're gone. Everett stood by the door, watching. This wasn't his moment. This was hers. Vance tried again to speak. This time, with enormous effort, he managed, mistake. Yes, you made many mistakes. The question is whether you understand what they were. Another long struggle. Right. Lydia went still. What? You were right. Each word cost him. Wrong. She stared at her father, this man who dominated her entire life, now reduced to broken speech and half a functioning body, trying to say what he'd never been able to say when he had power. That doesn't fix anything, she said quietly. It doesn't undo what you did, but I'll accept it. She stood. Vance's hand grabbed at the air, trying to keep her there. I'm going now, Lydia said. I have a life waiting for me, a real one, with a man who treats me like an equal, not a possession, with work I chose, not work you assigned me, with freedom you never wanted me to have. She paused at the door. I hope you recover. I hope you have years to think about the daughter you drove away. But I won't be coming back. This is goodbye. They left Vance trying to call after them with sounds that weren't quite words. In the carriage back to the hotel, Lydia was silent. Everett took her hand and she held on like she was drowning. Was I too harsh? She asked finally. No. He's dying. Maybe I should have been kinder. Being kind would have been lying. You told him the truth. That's more than most people get. He said he was wrong. He admitted it. Did that change anything for you? She thought about it. No, not really. It doesn't undo the years, doesn't make the fear go away, doesn't change what I had to do to escape. She looked at Everett. But maybe it means I can stop waiting for the next attack. Stop looking over my shoulder. Can't hurt me anymore. No, he can't. They stayed in the city 2 more days, visiting Aunt Catherine. The older woman welcomed them with warmth that reminded Everett of what family was supposed to be. She fed them, listened to Lydia's stories about the ranch, and gave them her blessing. "Your mother would be so proud," Catherine said, holding Lydia's hands. "You became exactly what she hoped you'd be, strong, independent, free." "I had help," Lydia said, glancing at Everett. "The best partnerships do require help. That's not weakness. That's wisdom." On the train back west, Lydia was different. Lighter, somehow. Like seeing her father broken and admitting fault had cut a cord she'd been tied to for too long. "I want to do something when we get back," she said as they watched the landscape roll past. "What's that?" "I want to actually marry you. Not in a judge's office in 10 minutes. A real wedding, with people we care about. In front of the ranch, maybe. Something that feels like a beginning instead of an escape plan." Everett smiled. "I think I'd like that." "You sure? It might involve planning, and people, and possibly terrible cake from the widow Henderson." "I'll risk the terrible cake." She leaned against his shoulder. "I never thought I'd want this, any of this. Marriage was always something forced on me. A trap. But with you, it's different." "How?" "Because you let me choose every day. You don't try to own me or control me or make me into something I'm not. You just let me be. That's what you're supposed to do with people you love." Most people don't understand that. They arrived back at the ranch in early spring. Snow was melting, revealing brown grass that would turn green in a few weeks. The land looked tired from winter but ready to wake up. Tom had kept everything running smoothly. The animals were healthy, the buildings were sound. He handed over a detailed list of everything that had happened in their absence, refused payment for the third time, and headed home with a promise to come to the wedding. Lydia threw herself into planning with the same intensity she brought to bookkeeping. She recruited the widow Henderson to help with food. Tom's wife offered to make a dress. Jacob Morrison agreed to officiate since he was legally qualified. Everett mostly stayed out of the way and did what he was told. That seemed like the smart approach. 2 weeks before the planned wedding, another telegram arrived. This one was shorter. Jonathan Vance had died. Funeral would be held in 3 days. Lydia read it without expression, set it down, went back to chopping vegetables for dinner. "You all right?" Everett asked. "I don't know what I am. I thought I'd feel something. Relief, maybe. Or grief. But it's just empty. Like he was already gone when we saw him." "You don't have to go to the funeral." "I know, and I'm not going to. He's dead. Nothing I do now changes what was between us. I'd rather spend that energy on living than on mourning. People might judge you for that. Let them. I spent too many years worrying about what people thought. I'm done with it." She wasn't done, though. That night, Everett found her in Rachel's old room, her room, crying quietly. He sat beside her on the bed. Didn't speak, just waited. "I'm not sad he's dead," she said finally. "I'm sad I never had a father worth missing. Does that make sense?" "Yeah, it does. When I was little, before my mother died, there were moments when he seemed almost human. He'd read to me sometimes, take me to see the trains, but after she was gone, he just stopped, like I was a reminder of her and that hurt too much. So he turned me into a project instead, something to manage and control. That wasn't your fault. I know, but it still feels like loss. Loss of what could have been if he'd been different, if he'd chosen to be a father instead of a tyrant." Everett pulled her close. "You get to grieve that. The father you should have had. That's real loss." She cried against his shoulder for a long time. When the tears finally stopped, she pulled back and wiped her face. "I want this wedding to be about beginnings," she said. "Not endings. Not my father or my past or any of that. Just us. Starting fresh. Can we do that?" "We can try." The wedding took place on a clear Saturday in April. They'd set up chairs in front of the house, facing west toward the mountains. Nothing fancy, just simple wooden seats borrowed from the church and arranged in rows. About 30 people came. Tom Fletcher and his family, the widow Henderson and half of Holt's Crossing, Jacob Morrison in his best suit. Cross had made the journey from Cheyenne, claiming he wouldn't miss it. Even a few of the neighboring ranchers showed up, men who'd started working with Everett more since Lydia had helped organize cooperative purchasing agreements. Lydia wore a simple dress, not white, but a soft blue that matched the spring sky. No veil. Hair down for once, loose around her shoulders. Everett wore his wedding suit, the same one from the courthouse. It still didn't fit quite right, but Lydia had told him she didn't care. Morrison kept the ceremony short, asked if they took each other. They both said yes, this time with full knowledge of what that meant, what it cost, what it was worth. By the authority vested in me, Morrison said, I pronounce you husband and wife. Again, officially, for real this time. People laughed. Everett kissed Lydia while everyone clapped. The celebration afterward was modest, food on tables outside. Tom played fiddle badly but enthusiastically. People talked and ate and watched the sunset behind the mountains. Everett found Cross standing alone, watching the festivities. Thank you for coming, Everett said. Means a lot. Wouldn't have missed it. Besides, I wanted to see how the story ended. Happy endings are rare in my line of work. Is it a happy ending? Cross smiled. Seems like it to me. You got the girl. She got her freedom. Vance is dead. The ranch is thriving. What else do you call it? Complicated. The best stories usually are. Later, after people had started to leave, Lydia found Everett standing by the barn. You all right? She asked. Just thinking. About what? About how different things are from a year ago. This time last year I was alone, hiding from life, going through motions. And now? Now I'm married to someone who terrifies me and challenges me and makes me want to be better than I am. Now I have a ranch that's actually making money. Now I have friends I didn't have before. Now I have a future I want to live into instead of just survive. He turned to face her. You changed everything. We changed everything together? Fair point. She took his hand. I have something to tell you. I was going to wait, but it feels like the right moment. What is it? I'm pregnant. The words took a moment to land. When they did, Everett felt something shift in his chest. Fear and joy and terror all mixed together. You're sure? I've been sure for 2 weeks. Wanted to tell you after the wedding. Make it a gift. That's a hell of a gift. Are you happy? He thought about it. About bringing a child into this life they'd built from scraps and stubbornness. About all the ways it could go wrong. All the ways he could fail. I'm terrified, he said honestly. But yeah, I'm happy. Good. Because I'm terrified too. But we'll figure it out. Like we figured out everything else. Together. Together. They stood there as the last guest departed, as darkness settled over the ranch, as stars began to appear in the clear sky. Two people who'd started as strangers became partners and had somehow built a life worth living. Summer arrived and Lydia's pregnancy progressed. She worked through the early months, though Everett worried constantly about her doing too much. She ignored his worrying and kept managing books, negotiating deals, running the operation with the same fierce competence she'd always shown. By August, she'd slowed down. Not by choice, but because her body demanded it. She hired a local girl to help with household work, and finally, reluctantly, admitted she needed to rest more. Everett adjusted the ranch schedule to stay closer to the house. He wasn't missing this. Wasn't going to be absent the way he'd been with Rachel. One evening in early September, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Lydia had her feet up, hands resting on her swollen belly. I've been thinking about names, she said. Yeah? If it's a girl, I want to name her Catherine, after my aunt. I like that. What about a boy? I was thinking Everett, make him a junior. Everett shook his head. No, let him be his own person, not carrying my name like a weight. Then what? How about James? That was my grandfather's name. Good man, honest, fair. James Hale. Lydia tested it. I like that. Catherine or James. Good strong names for a kid who'll probably inherit both our stubborn streaks. Heaven help them. They laughed. Then Lydia's expression changed. She grabbed Everett's hand, placed it on her belly. Feel that? He did. A small kick against his palm. A reminder that this was real. A person growing inside her. A future taking shape. That's our kid, she said softly. Yeah, it is. The baby came on a cold October morning. Lydia's water broke while she was reviewing accounts at the kitchen table. Everett rode for the doctor while the widow Henderson stayed with Lydia, boiling water and preparing the bedroom. Labor lasted 14 hours. Everett paced outside the door, listening to Lydia struggle, feeling helpless in ways he'd forgotten existed. Finally, in the early dawn, he heard a cry. Not Lydia. Someone smaller, newer. The widow Henderson opened the door. "You have a daughter. Both of them are fine." Everett went inside. Lydia lay in bed, exhausted and sweating, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in cloth. She looked up at him with an expression of pure exhaustion and fierce joy. "Meet Catherine," she said. The baby was small and red-faced and perfect in the way all newborns are. Everett took her carefully, like she might break if he held her wrong. "Hello, Catherine," he said softly. "Welcome to the mess." Lydia laughed weakly. "That's your first words to our daughter? Welcome to the mess?" "It's honest." "I suppose it is." The first months were hard. Catherine didn't sleep. She cried at random hours. Lydia was exhausted from feeding and recovering. Everett tried to help, but felt perpetually useless. But somewhere in the chaos, they figured it out, learned the rhythms of parenthood the way they'd learned everything else, through trial and error and stubbornness. By spring, Catherine was sleeping better. Lydia had returned to her bookkeeping work part-time. The ranch was running smoothly. They'd hired a permanent hand, a young man named Daniel who'd lost his own family's farm and needed work. Life settled into something sustainable. Not perfect. Never perfect, but good enough. One evening, Everett found Lydia in the office, going through old papers. She had the leather satchel open, the one she'd kept close when she first arrived. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Looking at these letters from my mother, reading them to Catherine sometimes." She pulled out a photograph. "This is the only picture I have of her. I want Catherine to know her grandmother existed, even if she never met her." Everett sat beside her. "Tell me about her." Lydia smiled. "She was quiet, gentle, but strong in ways my father never understood. She taught me to manage money because she said women needed to know how to take care of themselves. She taught me to think independently, even when my father wanted me to just agree with everything he said." She touched the photograph. "She would have liked you, would have appreciated that you let me be myself." "I'm sorry you lost her." "Me too. But I'm glad I had her at all, even for the short time." She looked at Catherine sleeping in her cradle. "I want to be for her what my mother was for me. Someone who teaches her she has choices, that she's not property or a project, just a person deserving of respect." "You will be." "How do you know?" "Because you've spent your whole life fighting to be treated that way. You know what it costs when it's denied. You won't deny it to her." Lydia leaned against him. "I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do." "I know. I love you too." 2 years passed. Catherine grew into a toddler with Lydia's dark hair and Everett's stubborn jaw. She was loud and opinionated and completely uninterested in being told what to do. They loved her fiercely. The ranch continued to prosper. Lydia's bookkeeping business had grown to serve half the county. Everett had expanded the herd and was becoming known for quality livestock. Together, they'd built something that worked. On a warm summer evening, they stood on the porch watching Catherine play in the yard. She was chasing chickens, laughing when they scattered. "You ever think about how we got here?" Lydia asked. "Sometimes. It started with fear, with running, with desperation. It did, but it became something else. Something better than either of us planned." Everett nodded. "I placed that advertisement wanting simple, no complications, someone who wouldn't ask questions or demand too much. I thought that's what I needed. And instead you got me, complicated, demanding, full of questions. Best mistake I ever made," she smiled. "I responded to that advertisement wanting distance, safety, a place to hide. And instead, I found a home, a partner, a life worth living instead of just surviving." They watched Catherine catch a chicken, then immediately let it go when it pecked at her. She laughed and ran to try again. "She's going to be a handful," Lydia said. "She already is." "Good. Let her be difficult. Let her ask questions and make demands and refuse to be simple. The world will try to make her smaller. We won't." Everett put his arm around Lydia's shoulders. "No, we won't." The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. In the distance, cattle lowed. In the yard, Catherine's laughter rang out clear and bright. Two people who'd started as strangers seeking escape had built something neither planned but both needed. A marriage born from fear had become one built on choice. A ranch that was failing had become a home that thrived. It wasn't the story either of them would have written if they'd had the chance, but it was theirs, messy and complicated and imperfect in all the ways that real life always is. And that was enough. Maybe that was the lesson, that the best things in life aren't the ones you plan carefully. They're the ones you build from scraps and stubbornness and the willingness to keep trying even when you're terrified. They're the ones that start with running and end with standing your ground. The ones that begin with strangers and become family. Everett had placed an advertisement wanting simple. He'd gotten Lydia instead. And in choosing her and being chosen by her, he'd found something he didn't even know he'd lost. A reason to open doors. A reason to face the future. A reason to live. Lydia had run from a father who treated her like property, had married a stranger to escape. But in that marriage, she'd found what she'd been denied her whole life: respect, partnership, freedom, love. Neither of them was perfect. They argued sometimes, made mistakes, struggled with fear and doubt, but they did it together. And that made all the difference. The ranch at Holt's Crossing became known over the years as a place where things worked, where people treated each other fair, where a woman managed books better than most men and nobody questioned it, where a quiet rancher had learned to open up and a runaway heiress had learned to stand still, where two people who shouldn't have worked somehow did. Because sometimes the best partnerships are the ones that start with honesty about limitations and grow into something that transcends them. Sometimes the strongest marriages are built not on romance, but on respect. Sometimes home isn't a place you're born into, but one you choose to build. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person you need isn't the one you thought you wanted. But if you're brave enough to let them in, to choose them every day despite the complications, to build something together from nothing but stubborn hope and hard work, then you might just find that what you built is worth more than anything you could have planned. That's what Everett and Lydia found in the dust-choked town of Holt's Crossing. Not perfection, not ease, not simplicity, but something better, something real, something worth fighting for.